Chapter 498. Corey, it's indeed been a while. But I didn't come to Kasi Empire this time to find trouble with your Shrine of Ice. Nor did I intend to preach the doctrines of our druidic order in Kasi Empire. There's no need for you to muster such a large force just for me, right? The old man named Kelly looked at Ice Celestial Corey with a faint smile, as though he was facing a formidable foe. He did not seem to fear this character of the Shrine of Ice. Han Shuo knew that not only did Ice Celestial Corey have absolute power over the Shrine of Ice, but even in Kasi Empire, His Majesty of Kasi Empire would have to heed his words. That was because Ice Celestial Corey was the oldest elder of the Pillon Imperial family. For so many years, the Pillon family had firmly grasped the power of Kasi Empire. Every rebellion in Kasi Empire was swiftly suppressed. This was directly related to Ice Celestial Corey. Even the current king of Kasi Empire knew what Ice Celestial Corey meant to the Pillon family and the Kasi Empire. It can't be helped. You don't leave the headquarters of the Druidic Order easily. Now that you have suddenly descended upon our Kasi Empire, I can't help but think that you are here to seek revenge. When Corey treated Kelly, he displayed due respect. Although his actions contained murderous intent, he was still courteous on the surface. The Shrine of Ice had the absolute initiative in Kasi Empire. Ever since the founding of Kasi Empire, the Shrine of Ice had been the state religion of Kasi Empire. For many years, the Shrine of Ice had used its unparalleled influence in Kasi Empire to destroy all religious organizations that were in conflict with it. The Druidic Order, as a religious organization with influence all over the profound continent, had also suffered a devastating blow in Kasi Empire. To this day, there was not a single shrine of the Druidic Order left in Kasi Empire. Even followers of the Druidic Order rarely appeared in Kasi Empire. It was precisely because of the extreme practices of the Shrine of Ice that the experts of the Druidic Order, who had always stood aloof from worldly affairs, flew into a rage. It seemed that they had secretly fought with the Shrine of Ice. Han Shuo wasn't too sure what the outcome was, but he knew from some Dark Mantle records that the Druidic Order held the upper hand for a short while. However, Ice Celestial Corey, as an elder of the royal family of the House of Pillon in Kasi Empire, had the support of the entire Kasi Empire. The Druidic Order were naturally no match for the Shrine of Ice in a prolonged battle in Kasi Empire. Although the Druidic Order held the upper hand in the short term, in the end, their forces were completely driven out of Kasi Empire. Just from the fact that Kasi could not find a single church of the Druidic Order, it could be seen that the two churches were at odds with each other. This time, the arrival of the Druidic Order's Kelly, who possessed at least demigod strength, was clearly noticed by Ice Celestial Corey and immediately snuck over. Citizens of Kasi Empire, please leave the auction house immediately. The rest of today's auction program can be rescheduled. Suddenly, Snow Celestial Tiana, who had been standing at the top of the auction house, gently called out. Inside the auction house, the noisy chatter abruptly quietened down after the representatives of the Shrine of Ice appeared. When they heard Corey's words, they gradually understood some clues. Upon hearing Tiana's words, each and every one of them looked terrified. Without saying a word, they cautiously and quietly left the auction house. In Kasi Empire, some of the true bigwigs were well aware of who was behind the fanatical religious believers of the Shrine of Ice. Obviously, they would not go against the largest organization in Kasi Empire. Some minor nobles who did not understand the identity of the Shrine of Ice and Ice Celestial Corey, who could not even afford to provoke the Shrine of Ice on the surface, naturally left obediently. Moreover, the situation inside the auction house was completely different from before. Just now, it was only Han Shuo who made the first move. With Sacred Knight Sulo here, in addition to the fact that Han Shuo had yet to truly go for the kill, they stayed behind with the attitude of watching a good show. However, when the fanatical religious believers of the Shrine of Ice appeared, they understood that today's matter was by no means as simple as it seemed. In particular, the grudge between the Shrine of Ice and the Druidic Order was something that everyone in Kasi Empire vaguely understood. Many nobles had once learned of the carnage these two religious organizations had stirred up in Kasi Empire many years ago. Therefore, when they discovered that today's matter was related to the long-standing grudge between the two churches, they immediately understood that there would be a bloody battle in this auction house. As people of high status, they naturally would not be exposed to unknown dangers at any time in this place. Therefore, the wisest choice was to run as far away as possible. The Druidic Order was a religion that believed in nature and valued life. They never advocated the indiscriminate killing of the innocent. Therefore, although Kelly and Lillian knew that Snow Celestial Tiana was doing this to deal with them without any misgivings, they did not make a move and use these people to threaten the Shrine of Ice. Old ancestor Brack, who was on the third floor, had once been informed of the relationship between the Shrine of Ice and the House of Pillon by his father. He had even seen the magical image of Ice Celestial Cori. When Brack came down from the third floor, he suddenly discovered that Ice Celestial Cori was the legendary character of the House of Pillon that even his father revered like a god, Ice Celestial Cori. Although Ice Celestial Cori very rarely left the Shrine of Ice, he knew the members of the House of Pillon and some personnel changes like the back of his hand. So much so that several of the most important personnel changes were personally ordered by him before the King of Kasi Empire carried them out. When Brack's cry of surprise rang out, Ice Celestial Cori was first taken aback. Soon after, he gave Brack a few glances and revealed a rare smile, saying, "You are little Brack, right? Haha, not bad, kid. Work hard." "Yes, old ancestor. Old ancestor actually knows me?" Upon hearing Ice Celestial Cori's praise, Brack, who had always been gloomy, actually became uncontrollably excited. He looked at Ice Celestial Cori with excitement, practically forgetting who he was. Nodding, Ice Celestial Cori smiled and said, You should leave too. You don't have to stay in this place." If it were anyone else, even if it were the King of Kasi Empire or Brack's father who said those words to him, Brack might still be a little stubborn. However, when faced with the most legendary character of the House of Pillon, Brack did not put up the slightest resistance. He respectfully performed a family salute towards Cori, obediently uttered a yes, and obediently walked out. From beginning to end, both Kelly and Lillian of the Druidic Order helplessly looked at the Shrine of Ice's arrangements. Not a single one of them made a move to stop them, nor did they capture any hostage to threaten the Shrine of Ice. Such was the doctrine of the Druidic Order. They were not the kind of people who would resort to unscrupulous means to achieve their goals. Just like how Lillian knew that the hand of goddess of the Druidic Order was in Han Shua's hands, even though she thought that Han Shua was just an ordinary fatty, and that she had Kelly by her side, she still humbly pleaded with Han Shua, intending to use an open and above-board transaction to exchange for the hand of goddess in Han Shua's hands. She did not use Kelly's exceedingly formidable strength to threaten Han Shua. The Druidic Order was a truly pure religion on profound continent. They were kind, upright, and did not have too much ambition. They believed in nature and fairness. Han Shua observed for a moment. In addition to his previous contact with the great Druid Caspian, he naturally had a favorable impression of the Druidic Order. If not for the Viride leaf having such an immeasurable effect on Wood Elite Zombie, perhaps Han Shua really wouldn't have made things difficult for them. Sighing in his heart, Han Shua looked at Kelly, and then looked at Ice Celestial Cori who was standing at the entrance, blocking the way. He suddenly came to a decision. By this time, many of the people in the auction house had already walked out. Even Brack, under the indication of his elder, Ice Celestial Cori, was making his way outside. When Sacred Knight Sulo discovered the arrival of Ice Celestial Cori, he greeted Sulo from afar. Soon after, taking advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention, he ferociously signaled Sophie, who was in disguise. The resoluteness in his eyes simply did not allow Sophie to refuse. Sophie understood from Sulo's gaze that Sulo was truly enraged this time. She understood her father's temperament all too well. She knew just how severe the consequences would be if she did not comply with Sulo's wishes under such circumstances. Therefore, as the crowd surged outside, Sophie stealthily shot a meaningful glance at Han Shua. Then, regardless of whether Han Shua had received her signal or not, Sophie secretly sighed in her heart and squeezed through the crowd to head outside. Han Shua obviously saw Sophie's signal. Without batting an eyelid, he lowered his head and concealed the enormous energy of his consciousness. Then, He carefully concealed the energy of his entire body as well, lest Ice Celestial Kori discover this enemy whom he hated even more than the Druidic Order. Having made up his mind, Han Shuo no longer stayed where he was. Taking advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention to him, he appeared to be a little panicky and uneasy, and slowly walked out like any other ordinary person. All of a sudden, that tyrannical, murderous, unparalleled appearance of his had vanished without a trace. It was as if he had become the most ordinary fatty in the crowd. There was nothing extraordinary about him. As Han Shuo blended into the crowd, looking a little timid as he made his way outside, the female druid Lilan gazed at Han Shuo's back with a hint of disdain on her face. She thought to herself, how could such a domineering character turn into such a coward in front of the Shrine of Ice? However, Kelly, who had been paying close attention to Han Shuo, revealed an incomparably astonished expression when he first saw Han Shuo become so timid. But as Han Shuo made his way outside step by step, Kelly's face turned into a half-smile as he looked at Han Shuo with some amusement. Chapter 499. Step by step, Han Shuo walked out of the arena. His eyes seemed to inadvertently glance at Ice Celestial Kori, preparing to launch an attack. Unlike the Druidic Order, Han Shuo was the kind of person who would use any means necessary to achieve his goals. Most people would never resort to such despicable acts of sneak attacks, but Han Shuo did not care about the messy rules. As long as he could inflict heavy damage on his enemy, Han Shuo would not hesitate to use any means necessary. In the battle against the Shrine of Ice, the reason Han Shuo was able to gain the upper hand, destroy the Shrine of Ice's god-making project, and kill their saint-grade experts, was all thanks to Han Shuo's unscrupulous methods. The Druidic Order and the Shrine of Ice had been fighting for many years. Not only were they completely driven out of Kasi Empire, but they also suffered heavy losses. That was all because the Druidic Order, a religious organization, was too open and aboveboard in their conduct. They did not use any sinister and cruel methods. Having concealed all of his aura, Han Shuo's physical undulations were no different from those of an ordinary person. His demonic yuan lay dormant within his demonic infant, waiting patiently. His consciousness was empty, without any sign of power. Everything about him was as ordinary as an ordinary person. Kelly, who was looking at Han Shuo with a faint smile, saw Han Shuo slowly walking towards Ice Celestial Kori. As though he had guessed Han Shuo's intentions, the corners of his mouth curved into a strange smile. As though covering for Han Shuo, he said to Kori, "So, how are you going to deal with me this time?" "Huh." Ice Celestial Kori raised his head and let out a light laugh, as though he found Kelly's question very amusing. Kori shot a meaningful glance at Snow Celestial Tiana, who was hovering above the auction house. Soon after, he looked at Kelly with a chuckle and sternly said, "Although our two sides do not have an explicit agreement, we have come to a tacit understanding many years ago. The leaders of both sides generally will not easily set foot in the center of the other's power. This time, you have secretly come to the capital of Kasi Empire." Huh. All of a sudden, Brack, who was about to leave the auction house, abruptly turned his head around and shot a glance at the seemingly simple and honest Han Shuo. Then, he opened his mouth to warn, "Ancestor, that fatty is a very dangerous character." As soon as he said those words, just as he was about to approach Ice Celestial Kori and make his move, a scarlet bloody radiance suddenly burst forth from his body like a bloody sun. The marble floor beneath Han Shuo shattered in a split second. Like an enraged hedgehog, streaks of blood-red blades emerged from his body, like the sharp spikes on the body of a hedgehog. All of a sudden, he charged towards Ice Celestial Kori. This time, the eruption happened all of a sudden. When Han Shuo's blood-red radiance flourished, Ice Celestial Kori instantly knew who he was facing. After all, Han Shuo's demonic arts were just too unique. Any powerhouse who had fought with him would never forget that unique power. Once Ice Celestial Kori knew that the sudden attacker was Han Shuo, he immediately focused all of his attention as though he was facing a formidable foe. He did not even have the time to ponder why Han Shuo would appear here. Holding a long sword in his hand, Ice Celestial Kori's brows were deeply furrowed. He was unprecedentedly solemn. Just as Han Shuo was about to collide with him, his pupils abruptly contracted, and he suddenly soared into the air. Like a ferocious super-ranked magical beast, Han Shuo collided with him. Blood and chi burst forth from all over his body. His imposing manner climbed to its peak, crushing the marble floor into stone chips along the way. Strange popping sounds could be heard in the air. If this strike were to land, Han Shuo could guarantee that Ice Celestial Corey would die without a doubt. It was a pity that Han Shuo's terrifying strike, which he had been waiting for, had to be launched prematurely due to Brack's reminder. Due to the distance and timing being not optimal, Ice Celestial Corey had the time to dodge. It was no longer possible for Han Shuo to collide with Ice Celestial Corey. In a battle between top-notch experts, a small mistake could reverse the entire situation. Although Han Shuo had missed the opportunity to kill Ice Celestial Corey in one strike, because Han Shuo had caught Han Shuo by surprise this time, coupled with the fact that Ice Celestial Corey had yet to recover from his injuries, Han Shuo still had the upper hand. Han Shuo, who was ferociously colliding with Ice Celestial Corey, suddenly shot up into the air like a large rubber ball. 100 rays of swift and fierce bloody light shot out like razor-sharp blades, ruthlessly cutting at Ice Celestial Corey like several dozen large scissors, chasing after Ice Celestial Corey who was in midair. At this moment, Ice Celestial Corey had nowhere to hide. He knew that if he did not receive this attack, Han Shuo would follow up like a shadow and unleash a series of even more ferocious attacks. At that time, he would have to endure even more explosive attacks. Therefore, just as he flew up into the air, Ice Celestial Corey had already condensed all the divine energy and fighting aura in his body, and fiercely pressed down with the simplest and most straightforward style. For a moment, cold air filled every corner of the auction house. Following the brandishing of the longsword in Ice Celestial Corey's hand, crunching sounds could be heard in the air, as though space itself had been frozen solid and was being forcibly sliced apart by the longsword. Han Shuo's attack, which was violently shooting towards Ice Celestial Corey, soon sensed a change in space. He could clearly feel the impact that Ice Celestial Corey's sword had on space. His attack, which was originally cutting towards Ice Celestial Corey at lightning speed, was clearly affected in terms of speed. Scram! Right at this moment, Han Shuo let out a violent roar. Nobody knew what strange move he had used, but the snake-like bloody rays that filled the sky suddenly entangled with each other, forming the shape of a ferocious dragon. With that, the scattered forces gathered together, and the ferocious dragon's attack rumbled forward like a hot knife through butter. The crunching sounds in the air became even louder as it ferociously collided with Ice Celestial Corey's longsword. An earth-shattering explosion suddenly erupted from within the auction house. The aftershocks from the exchange of blows between two demigod existences surged outwards. It was as though space itself had truly shattered. Even the entire auction house could not withstand the impact and collapsed with a loud rumble. Brack, who had reached the door earlier, had blood flowing out of his mouth and nose like worms. And that was only because Sacred Knight Sulo had blocked the attack. As for the other celebrities who had yet to completely withdraw from the auction house, more than a dozen of them were instantly killed by Han Shuo and Ice Celestial Corey's attack. Some of them were completely unscathed, but their internal organs had been completely destroyed. There were also some who were blasted into pieces on the spot by the aftershocks. The might of a single strike had turned the auction house into a collapsed mine, turning it into a miserable scene akin to hell on earth. Rocks the size of millstones were smashing down from above, without any regard for their lives. The few dignitaries who had not yet died were all wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves as they fled for their lives. Sacred Knight Sulo was aghast. He looked at Han Shuo as though he was looking at a demon that had crawled out of hell. Without giving any explanation, he pulled Brack, who was as dumb as a wooden chicken, and dragged him out with all his might. Completely different from the conservative approach of the Druidic Order, once Han Shuo saw an opportunity, he would not care how great the losses would be. Han Shuo did not care in the slightest if some of the celebrities and dignitaries of Kasi Empire were killed in the aftermath. He would strike decisively. If he could kill, he would kill. If he couldn't, he would severely wound them. This was where Han Shuo was more frightening than the Druidic Order. Two enemies of equal strength. One of them had many misgivings in his heart, while the other was unscrupulous in order to achieve his goals. One could tell at a glance which one was more frightening. With one strike, Ice Celestial Corey's body, under the powerful inertia, directly broke through the roof of the auction house and flew high into the sky. This was also an important reason for the instant collapse of the auction house. On the other hand, Han Shuo's feet were buried deep in the ground. He raised his head, brimming with fighting spirit, and stared unwaveringly at Ice Celestial Corey, who had turned into a white dot. He seemed to be accumulating power and preparing for an even more ferocious strike. He turned a blind eye to the falling rocks around him, as steady as a boulder. At this moment, Han Shuo's mediocre and honest demeanor was nowhere to be found. Although his appearance had not changed, he gave everyone a frightening feeling of sharpness like a sword. Druid Lillian, who had been looking at Han Shuo's back with some disdain, was now covering her small mouth with her hand in disbelief. She looked at Han Shuo as though she was looking at a monster, her heart filled with horror and fear. Fortunately, we did not snatch the hand of Goddess from him. Otherwise, perhaps even a sage would not be able to restrain him. This person. Who is this person? How could he be so terrifying? As though he knew what Lillian was thinking, Kelly, an expert of the Druidic Order, looked at Han Shuo with a solemn expression and said, "Lancelot Empire, Brett L. City Lord Brian, you indeed live up to your reputation." Brian? It's him? That young expert who defeated two sacred rank experts? Lillian cried out in surprise. It seemed that she knew a little about Han Shuo's identity. Other than the legendary City Lord Brian who possesses martial arts from a foreign land, I really can't think of anyone else. Kelly looked at Han Shuo with a solemn expression and asked, "Is that right? City Lord Brian?" At this point, Han Shuo knew that he could no longer conceal his identity. Therefore, he cleanly and efficiently restored his original appearance and said with a hearty smile, "That's right, Sage Kelly. After I helped you, that Ice Celestial Corey. This time he's going to suffer even more injuries." "Oh, thank you very much, Kelly chuckled as he looked at Han Shuo. His eyes flickered as he looked at Ice Celestial Corey, who was slowly descending above his head. No one knew what he was thinking. "So it really is you?" Snow Celestial Tiana, who was shrouded in mist, stared coldly at Han Shuo below. It has indeed been a long time. You whore who sold out her friend for glory." Han Shuo cursed as he stared venomously at Tiana. Otherwise, he wouldn't look like this. "Hi." Han Shuo suddenly greeted Kelly of the Druidic Order. When Kelly looked at him with some astonishment, Han Shuo suggested, "I'll leave Corey to you. I'll deal with that bitch. Today, the two of us will join hands and destroy the foundation of the Shrine of Ice. What do you think?" Although Han Shuo didn't know how strong Kelly truly was, the fact that the Shrine of Ice had mobilized such a large force to deal with him clearly indicated that he was an extremely tyrannical character. Han Shuo originally planned to make use of the terrifying threat of the six-horned tribal king to lure the headquarters of the Shrine of Ice to deliver a devastating blow. However, looking at the current situation, if he were to join hands with Kelly, this unfathomable expert of the Druidic Order, it seemed that they wouldn't even need to wait for the six-horned tribal king to arrive. There would be hope for them to kill the two most powerful existences of the Shrine of Ice. Although Ice Celestial Corey was indeed powerful, his strength had been sharply reduced after sustaining heavy injuries. Han Shuo believed that Kelly, this unfathomable expert, would certainly be able to kill or block Ice Celestial Corey. As for this Snow Celestial Tiana, although she was a demigod magus, Han Shuo was equally confident that he could defeat or even kill her. As for the other small fries of the Shrine of Ice, Han Shuo, as a grand magus necromancer, could absolutely drown them with the help of the 5 elite zombies and the enormous undead army. That was why Han Shuo made such a proposal. Under Han Shuo's attentive gaze, the eyes of Kelly, the leader of the Druidic Order, flickered. He seemed to be very tempted by Han Shuo's proposal. This great sage who had lived for God knows how many years was obviously no ordinary person. He knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The many years of grievances between them and the Shrine of Ice had been placed on him for a long time. It was time to settle the score. All right. After muttering to himself for a moment, Kelly, the great sage of the Druidic Order, suddenly nodded. As soon as the word "all right" left Kelly's mouth, his aura suddenly skyrocketed. Along with his aura, his body also skyrocketed. In the blink of an eye, the great sage Kelly had transformed into a 12 meters tall giant ape, bursting through the auction house that had yet to completely collapse. An extremely dense and dreadful energy abruptly erupted from this giant ape. It was as though he was a mighty deity that had existed since time immemorial, bringing with him the imposing manner of a monarch descending upon the world. The shape-shifting technique that only druids of the Druidic Order could master was indeed incomparably miraculous. Kelly, who had suddenly transformed into a giant ape, no longer had the slightest trace of an old man. The appearance of such an earth-shattering war beast cast a psychological shadow on everyone present. Although the Druidic Order wasn't as powerful as the Church of Light or the Calamity Church on Profound Continent, they still couldn't be underestimated. Looking at Kelly's dreadful might, Han Shua even wondered if the Druidic Order had lost the title of #1 religion on the continent to the Church of Light because they advocated peace and nature. After transforming into a giant ape, Han Shua could no longer associate him with that old man past his prime. He pounded his chest and bellowed furiously. His 2 mountain-sized hands abruptly swatted at the disciples of the Church of Ice clad in white. The whistling sound of the wind sent sand and pebbles flying. Before the dreadful force had even landed, the whistling wind had already caused pain to the skin and flesh. If this blow had landed, no one would have been able to withstand it and would have been reduced to a meat patty. Run! Run away! Ice Celestial Corey abruptly jumped up and yelled. Not caring about the uneven air around him, he raised the long sword in his hand and charged at Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape. It seemed that he intended to fight to the death with Kelly. An enormous, sparkling and translucent icicle suddenly wrapped around Ice Celestial Corey. Hiding within the icicle, Ice Celestial Corey charged straight at Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape. Good timing. Let me see if you have really made any progress after so many years. Although Kelly had transformed into a giant ape, he could still speak human language. It was just that his voice boomed like thunder, and his imposing manner was first class. Clang! One of the giant palms that Kelly had swatted down split off and pushed towards Ice Celestial Corey. Under the barrage of Kelly's mountain-sized palm, that extremely sharp icicle was shattered in a split second. In the end, the wind from the palm swept across Ice Celestial Corey's body, causing him to lose his footing and nearly be sent flying. Outside the auction house, the Knights of the Shrine of Ice were fully armed and ready to charge in at any moment. Suddenly, they saw a colossal figure directly tearing through the auction house and exposing itself. It was Kelly's other palm that struck towards them. With just a single palm strike, more than a dozen Earth Knights, together with their warhorses, were directly smashed into meat patties. Kelly's palm strike was immensely powerful. The bodies of these people were even glued to the ground. It was as though they had been crushed by a mountain. They were flat and tidy, with not the slightest bit of uneven ground. So strong. Han Shua was stunned and immediately cried out in surprise. He had to admit that this Kelly who had transformed into a giant ape was simply terrifying to the extreme. Han Shua had never seen such a ferocious attack before. This was what it meant to be invincible. His brute force was first class. Of course, back then, the great sage Kelly had to face both the Ice Celestial and the Snow Celestial by himself before he was defeated. Humph, if it weren't for the fact that our Druidic Order only has one demigod existence, how could we have allowed the Ice Celestial cult to run amok in Kasi Empire last time? At some point, the Druid Lillian had actually arrived at Han Shua's side and proudly shouted, "One man against 2 Ice Celestials and Snow Celestials." Han Shua was truly a little shocked. It seemed that although they were all demigods, This leader of the Druidic Order was obviously stronger than Ice Celestial Cori and Snow Celestial Tiana. It was no wonder that when Kelly appeared in Kasi Empire this time, the Ice Celestial and Snow Celestial immediately mobilized. However, it was obvious that Snow Celestial Tiana had fused her origin crystal with her soul. Han Shuo could clearly sense that Tiana's strength had greatly improved. If it weren't for the fact that Han Shuo happened to be in the auction house, Kelly would have had a hard time dealing with two demigods all by himself. Now that Han Shuo was here, he naturally wouldn't let the Shrine of Ice get what they wanted. Seeing that Snow Celestial Tiana had started chanting magical incantations in a panic, Han Shuo suddenly laughed wildly and said, "You bitch, don't you forget about me? My young friend, as long as you can hold Tiana back for 10 minutes, after today, the Ice Celestial cult will no longer be a threat." Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape, let out a hearty laugh that shook the heavens. All the spears and lances of the knights landed on his body like tickling tickles. He took large strides and circled around the devastated auction house. He repeatedly slapped with his two hands. A squadron of knights from the Shrine of Ice were all smashed into meat patties. "No problem at all," Han Shuo straightforwardly assured. He then charged towards Snow Celestial Tiana at lightning speed. Chapter 501. Tiana slowly recited a water magic incantation. All of a sudden, snowflakes fluttered, the world froze, and all things froze. The more powerful the magic, the longer the incantation. This was a universally acknowledged truth in the world of magic. Seeing Snow Celestial Tiana's incantation drag on for such a long time, and the entire space slowly turning into a world of ice and snow, Han Shuo knew that Tiana's incantation was extraordinarily powerful. Unlike dealing with Ice Celestial Cori, Han Shuo only needed to approach Tiana as fast as he could. Once Han Shuo got close, she would be skinned alive, if not dead. Mages were mages, after all. The weakness of the physical body was an unchangeable drawback. The cold wind whistled, and the water element between heaven and earth suddenly condensed. Before Han Shuo could approach Tiana, 5 lifelike, sparkling water dragons, more than 10 meters long, suddenly took shape in the sky. Using water magic to condense into physical objects to attack was a spell that could be released by any water journeyman mage. But to condense water dragons that were as lifelike as Tiana, and 5 of them at once, was absolutely unheard of. As a necromancer, Han Shuo was very clear about the general knowledge of magic. Whether it was water, fire, or earth magic, all could use the elements of water, fire, or earth to condense into physical objects. But the larger the object, the greater the elemental energy required, and the harder it was to manipulate. Last time in Tarag Canyon, if Tiana had been able to condense 5 such enormous water dragons, Han Shuo believed that he and Statholm the old monster would have had a much easier time. It seemed that after fusing her soul with the origin crystal of water, Tiana's strength had indeed greatly improved. Once her soul had fused with the origin crystal of water, Tiana's perception and manipulation of the water element had immediately reached a whole new realm. Not only could she condense 5 lifelike dragons, but she could also use the water dragons to attack with the strength of her soul. Such power was not much inferior to Kelly's form as a giant ape. Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape, cried out in surprise when 3 of the water dragons, each more than 10 meters long, surged violently in the frigid wind. "Tiana, since when did you possess such great power?" While Kelly was crying out in alarm, his 2 hands weren't idle. Having just forced Ice Celestial Cori back, Kelly's mountainous palms suddenly swept towards the 3 water dragons. Kelly was also over 10 meters tall, and he was like a colossus that stood in the sky. Although the 3 water dragons were long enough, because they were slithering and their bodies were not wide enough, they looked like 3 large pythons in front of him. However, the 3 water dragons were indeed incomparably nimble under Tiana's control. Tiana clearly understood that Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape, possessed astonishing brute strength. She did not dare to directly use the 3 water dragons to meet force with force. Instead, she circled around Kelly in an extremely methodical manner, coordinating with Ice Celestial Corey to deal with Kelly. However, Tiana had also expended all of her energy in this process. Furthermore, there was also Han Shuo, who was charging at her like a tiger watching its prey. She had absolutely no leisure time to reply. Tiana condensed a total of 5 water dragons. 3 of them were used to attack Kelly, while the other 2 split off and headed straight for Han Shuo to wrap around and bite him. Tiana seemed to understand that Han Shuo was extremely fast. When the 2 water dragons attacked Han Shuo from her side, they adopted an entrenched position, with the greater half of their bodies surrounding Tiana. They only used their elongated movements to attack Han Shuo, blocking Han Shuo's path to deal with Tiana. Although the water dragons formed from the condensation of the water element weren't real water dragons, their vivid and lifelike state was even more nimble than a real water dragon. There wasn't the slightest trace of stiffness or sluggishness. To be able to condense the elements into a tangible object, and to be able to achieve such a feat with a tangible object, was simply godly. It seemed that after fusing her soul with the origin crystal of water, Tiana's manipulation of the water element had indeed reached the acme of perfection. Han Shuo watched as Tiana used only 2 water dragons to block off all the paths to approach him. Hiding within the protection of the 2 water dragons, she continued to calmly chant other magical incantations. Han Shuo couldn't help but crease his brows. In his mind, he racked his brains for a way to deal with Tiana. If the water elite zombie had completely digested all the energy he'd absorbed from the ice goddess statue, Han Shuo believed that as long as the water elite zombie stood there, he would be able to completely disintegrate the 5 water dragons with his innate talent of instinct. However, just like Little Skull, water elite zombie was at a critical juncture and must not be disturbed. You want to trap me with just a few water dragons? Han Shuo suddenly snorted coldly. Soon after, he formed a circle with his hands and began to circle in the air as if he was practicing Tai Chi. Streaks of black lightning shot out from Han Shuo's hands. All of a sudden, a small vortex formed in front of Han Shuo's chest as his hands rotated. A frightening, devouring force was suddenly generated. The small vortex seemed to be driving some strange energy between heaven and earth. It grew larger and larger, gradually turning into an incomparably frightening gray vortex. Han Shuo continued to pour energy into the vortex. The all-devouring power of demonic arts fully manifested within the enormous vortex. In a split second, all the cold currents in the air were drawn in by this frightening force, and were all forcibly pulled in by the vortex. Although the sky was originally cold and clear, it suddenly changed. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere, and the sky darkened. The enormous vortex was like a magical beast that had been hiding in the abyss for millions of years. It opened its enormous mouth, as if it wanted to devour the entire world. The earth was a vast expanse, as if there was no power that could stop this frightening, devouring force. The air, the cold currents, the towering stone pillars, everything was drawn in by this force, involuntarily and rapidly falling into the vortex. Even the bodies of the squadron of knights that Kelly had pushed into the ground were forcibly pulled out. Together with their armor, weapons, and warhorses, they flew from the ground into the sky, involuntarily falling into the enormous vortex. The larger the object, the greater the suction force. The 5 separated water dragons were similarly drawn in by this force. They could no longer maintain their nimble bodies and were pulled out of their original positions, falling into the enormous vortex high up in the sky. At this point, even Tiana, who had fused her soul with the origin crystal of water, could no longer control the 5 water dragons. She could only watch helplessly as the water dragons flew into the enormous vortex at the center, but there was nothing she could do. As soon as she tried to use her mental strength to control the water dragons, she felt an unshakable force rushing towards her. She nearly lost control of her body and fell into the vortex as well. Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape, stood proudly in the vault of heaven, swaying from side to side. He suddenly let out a howl and stomped his feet down like a golden cudgel. His hairy thighs pierced directly into the ground, like a towering ancient tree that had stood tall for millions of years. No matter how sand, stones, wind, or rain he would not fall. One had to admit that Kelly's strength was indeed formidable. All of the large objects had been sucked into the whirlpool. Only this incomparably large Kelly was able to remain unaffected by the whirlpool with his feet sinking deep into the ground. In the blink of an eye, the entire scene had descended into chaos. Fortunately, the Shrine of Ice had cleared away everyone in the vicinity before coming over. Therefore, other than the disciples of the Shrine of Ice who had come to encircle Kelly, there were no other casualties. Amidst the howling gales, Han Shua suddenly stopped and put his palms together. A devastating explosion suddenly came from that enormous vortex. Ice water mixed with rocks, dust, and human corpses rained down. It was at this moment that Han Shua suddenly burst into action, charging straight at Snow Celestial Tiana like a bolt of lightning. With a wave of his hands, the demonic blades unfurled like a peacock spreading its tail. Cold, chilling light sparkled, bringing a shock to the depths of one's soul. Not good. Tiana was greatly shocked. Without a second thought, she immediately retreated. As a magus, Tiana was well aware of where her weaknesses were. Once Han Shua got close, Tiana knew that she would not be able to escape from Han Shua's murderous hands. Therefore, she fled from Han Shua's attack at all costs. In the process of escaping, Tiana constantly laid down layers of defense. Smooth, sparkling walls of ice appeared out of thin air, blocking Han Shua's only path. Crack, crack, crack. The smooth, mirror-like walls of ice could not withstand a single attack from Han Shua. They were broken apart as easily as crushing dry weeds. Han Shua persevered in his pursuit of Tiana, not letting up in the slightest. Retreat. Tiana did not forget to remind them as she fled. The Shrine of Ice experts, led by Ice Celestial Corey and Snow Celestial Tiana, had utterly failed in their joint attack on Kelly, the leader of the Druidic Order, due to Han Shua's sudden appearance. Not only had they failed completely, but their roles had also changed. Kelly, who was originally the prey, had, with Han Shua's help, overturned his disadvantageous position in one fell swoop and became the hunter, and as the host, Ice Celestial Corey of the Shrine of Ice had instead become the target of pursuit. They were both demigods, and Kelly's strength was higher than that of Ice Celestial Corey and Snow Celestial Tiana. It was obviously very difficult for him to fight one against two. However, with the greater threat of Han Shua chasing after Tiana, Kelly could deal with Ice Celestial Corey alone, especially when Corey was injured by Han Shua. This gave him an absolute advantage. The collapse came so suddenly. The situation changed drastically in an instant. Han Shua and Kelly, each with their eyes on the highest leaders of the Shrine of Ice, began their pursuit within the borders of Kasi Empire. Chapter 502. Tiana made up her mind. Without the slightest hesitation, she retreated at top speed. Han Shua and his party fought in the capital city of Kasi Empire. Although the crowd around the auction house had been evacuated, there were still all kinds of stalls and several blocks further away. When Kelly had transformed into the colossal ape, his enormous body had been clearly seen by the many small merchants and peddlers around him. Later on, when Tiana had conjured 5 water dragons, their vast momentum had thoroughly frightened them. For a time, it had caused a huge panic in the downtown area. Several nearby armies of Kasi Empire immediately rushed towards the center of the city, ready to set out. While Tiana was retreating, she saw a brigade of knights from Kasi Empire heading towards them in full armor. She hastily flew towards them. The Shrine of Ice held an extremely special status in Kasi Empire. The importance His Majesty the King attached to the Shrine of Ice was well known throughout the nation. Seeing Tiana rapidly retreating to the brigade of knights, Han Shua's body immediately halted midway. After Snow Celestial Tiana's soul had successfully fused with the origin crystal of water, her strength had increased substantially from her original foundation. Now that Tiana had retreated to the brigade of knights, it was almost impossible for Han Shua to kill her. Her strength was originally about the same as Han Shua's. As long as Han Shua couldn't suddenly approach her, Han Shua indeed wouldn't be able to inflict serious damage on her. At this moment, due to the panicked retreat of the Shrine of Ice, Snow Celestial Tiana and Ice Celestial Corey's party were separated by a large distance. Not far away, Ice Celestial Corey was leading a group of Shrine of Ice disciples, retreating towards the magical transportation matrix at the center of Zero City. Kelly, in the form of a giant ape, was hot on Ice Celestial Corey's tail. However, Corey was extremely cunning. He simply shuttled back and forth between those fleeing merchants and peddlers. Kelly, who believed in the teachings of the Druidic Order, couldn't bear to involve those innocent merchants and peddlers. Although he had the opportunity to strike, he held back due to his scruples. At this rate, neither Han Shuo nor Kelly seemed to have any way of succeeding. Han Shuo froze in the void for a moment, then promptly made a decision to turn around. He no longer cared about Tiana, who was hiding in the middle of a night battalion with lingering fear, and chased after the craftily escaping Ice Celestial Corey. As long as Tiana couldn't make it in time, Han Shuo and Kelly could join forces to deal with Ice Celestial Corey alone. Given his wounded body, it was absolutely impossible for him to hold out for too long. Han Shuo was confident that he could kill him in a short time. Kelly could not bear to involve the innocent, and could only watch helplessly as such a great opportunity slipped away from him. However, Han Shuo naturally would not be so indecisive. Once he allowed Han Shuo to get close to Ice Celestial Corey, regardless of who was beside him, Han Shuo would strike ruthlessly. Tiana gasped for breath as she floated in midair with her magic staff in hand. Her eyes were glistening as she stared at Han Shuo, ready to deal with Han Shuo's thunderous attacks in an instant. Tiana felt a lot safer in the middle of the night battalion. As long as she could put some distance between Han Shuo and her, Tiana believed that her magic would definitely be able to finish off Han Shuo. After her soul had fused with the origin crystal, she discovered that every water magic she released was so carefree and unrestrained. Apart from some water magic that was extremely destructive and consumed a lot of mental strength, Tiana didn't even need to chant incantations for some mid to high-level water magic. With a single thought, the magic would be completed. When she was escaping just now, Tiana had used the silent casting method to instantly deploy layers of ice walls to slow down Han Shuo's high speed. After feeling that her strength had greatly improved, she was obviously full of confidence. However, just as she was focusing all her attention on Han Shuo and had made all her preparations, she suddenly discovered that Han Shuo was retreating like lightning. Tiana was stunned at first, thinking that Han Shuo was playing some crafty scheme. It was only when Han Shuo and Ice Celestial Corey were getting closer and closer that she came to her senses with a start. She knew that Han Shuo was planning to concentrate his forces and finish off Ice Celestial Corey first. Oh no! Tiana was greatly alarmed. She hastily said, "Attack with all your might. Kill that enemy demon at all costs." Yes, an earth-shattering response rang out. Under Tiana's command, the Night Battalion immediately charged towards the colossal ape. Tiana took the lead. Like a white ribbon, she recklessly chased after Han Shuo's flight path. "Let's join hands and finish off Corey first." Han Shuo's voice suddenly rang out just as Kelly was hot on Ice Celestial Corey's tail without making a move. "No, there are too many innocent people around him. We can't make a move here." Kelly was first startled when he saw Han Shuo approaching, but immediately stopped him. Han Shuo cursed inwardly. He thought to himself, "This Kelly is really pedantic. No wonder he suffered a crushing defeat in Kasi Empire back then. Based on his style of doing things, it would be exceedingly difficult to eradicate his enemies." Han Shuo inwardly cursed at Kelly's pedantry. He couldn't care less whether or not he would harm the innocent. Besides, these innocent people weren't citizens of Bretel City. He couldn't care less. Before he even got close to Ice Celestial Corey, Han Shuo had already flung out a bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts. As soon as Ice Celestial Corey heard Han Shuo's voice, he immediately knew things weren't looking good. He understood that Han Shuo and Kelly were entirely different types. Therefore, when Han Shuo's voice rang out, he no longer dared to hide among the crowd. He abruptly soared into the air and flew outwards. Under Han Shuo's control, the bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts closely followed Ice Celestial Corey. If Corey hadn't immediately flown out, then all the merchants around him would have been affected and died under the bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts. As expected, it's this god of death. Ice Celestial Corey felt an incomparable headache. The unscrupulous Han Shuo was obviously much more difficult to deal with than Kelly. Ice Celestial Corey, who was already injured to begin with, had just been struck by Han Shuo. Without Tiana's help, if he were to face either Han Shuo or Kelly alone, he would definitely lose. Now that the two of them were ganging up on him, he had even less of a chance. Clang. While fleeing, Ice Celestial Corey had no choice but to pull himself out to block a sword strike. Icicles rained down from the sky, and Han Shuo's bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts was broken by Ice Celestial Corey in one strike. Han Shuo let out a soft eh. While closely pursuing Ice Celestial Corey, he was somewhat astonished. As it turned out, when Ice Celestial Corey broke Han Shuo's bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts, he had deliberately expended a bit more energy to forcibly destroy the shooting force, so as not to bring disaster to the merchants and peddlers below. As soon as he connected this with Corey's sudden action of flying out from the crowd, Han Shuo suddenly realized that Ice Celestial Corey wasn't completely useless. Although he was extremely callous and merciless towards his enemies and the Dark Dragons, he was still very protective towards the people of his own country. Unlike what Han Shuo had imagined, he didn't care about the civilians of Kasi Empire at all. Previously, when Kelly was hot on his heels, Han Shuo had hidden himself among the civilians. He had grasped Kelly's intentions and knew that Kelly would never attack civilians. That was why he had blatantly taken advantage of Kelly's weakness and calmly escaped. At least you still have some humanity left in you, thought Han Shuo coldly. He did not stop in the slightest. At this moment, he was already very close to Ice Celestial Corey. As he chanted an incantation, rows of bone spears whooshed towards Ice Celestial Corey. Due to the delay caused by the bloody radiance of 10,000 cuts, Ice Celestial Corey was already within Han Shuo's attack range. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Kelly, who had transformed into a giant ape, finally arrived at Han Shuo's side after carefully avoiding the civilians below his feet. Don't give him any time. Han Shuo immediately shouted after the bone spears were shot out in rows. Generally speaking, experts whose strength had reached the demigod level were bound to have a way to preserve their lives. At the very least, they would surely have a spatial scroll that could tear apart space. This was the precious experience Han Shuo had accumulated after many years of battles. Therefore, when he saw that his side now occupied an overwhelming advantage, Han Shuo believed that Ice Celestial Corey would certainly resort to extraordinary measures. At this moment, he absolutely could not allow Corey to escape so easily. Otherwise, all his previous efforts today would be in vain. Han Shuo's loud shout immediately reminded Kelly of this point. After all, the Druidic Order was not a church that was ruthless and exterminating. As the leader of the Druidic Order, Kelly did not have a heart as ruthless as Han Shuo. But after Han Shuo's loud shout, Kelly immediately reacted. Suddenly, the scene of the Druidic Order's followers being brutally murdered by the Shrine of Ice in Kasi Empire many years ago surfaced in Kelly's mind. Whenever he recalled Corey's merciless and cruel treatment of his enemies, Kelly knew that if Corey did not die today, the Druidic Order would certainly pay an enormous price. Roar! Kelly bellowed at the sky. He took a huge step forward and blocked off Corey's only escape route. No one knew what Kelly had done, but following his heaven-shaking bellow, layers of ripples appeared in the sky. The elements of heaven and earth were suddenly thrown into chaos. It was as though the sky had suddenly collapsed. After Kelly's bellow, Ice Celestial Corey sensed the changes in the sky and immediately understood that the spatial scroll was useless. When he saw Kelly blocking off his escape route and Han Shuo recklessly charging at him, Corey's face turned ashen. He knew that his life had come to an end today. Not good, Kelly suddenly yelled, turning pale with fright. When Han Shuo, who had already reached Ice Celestial Corey, heard Kelly's loud shout and saw the enormous Kelly rapidly retreating, he suddenly understood something. Like Han Shuo, he reined in his horse at the brink of the precipice and abruptly froze on the spot. A dazzling radiance, mixed with terrifying energy, erupted from ice celestial Corey's body, causing destructive energy undulations within a range of 10 meters. Cracks that resembled the pattern of a turtle's shell appeared in the space. When ice celestial Corey was reduced to ashes, the cracks instantly sucked in everything. Under the relentless pursuit of Han Shuo and Kelly, ice celestial Corey was forced to his death. Chapter 503. It had to be said that ice celestial Corey still had some conscience when it came to treating the citizens of Kasi Empire. Otherwise, he wouldn't have limited the self-destruct radius to 10 meters. It was precisely because of this that Han Shuo, reminded by Kelly, was spared from the aftershocks of Ice Celestial Corey's death. Ice Celestial Corey, one of the highest leaders of the Shrine of Ice, was finally cornered and forced to his death by the combined pursuit of Han Shuo and Kelly. His final, suicidal attack before his death did not truly harm Han Shuo and Corey. The light dissipated. The space that had undergone a temporary change due to the powerful energy returned to normal in the blink of an eye. However, Ice Celestial Corey had forever vanished from the duo's sight. Han Shuo heaved a sigh of relief. He felt as though a heavy stone hanging in his heart was suddenly thrown into an endless abyss. He felt an indescribable sense of comfort and contentment. Dead. He died just like that. Sigh. Kelly sighed ruefully. His colossal ape body began to shrink little by little. Experts with demigod existences were characters at the pinnacle of the pyramid on Profound Continent. They were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chelan horns. Although they were enemies, Kelly still felt that it was a pity. So what if they were demigod existences? Weren't they still unable to escape death? Looking at Snow Celestial Tiana, who had turned into a streak of white light, Han Shuo suggested with a malicious smile, "Kelly, I think we should completely destroy the Shrine of Ice's foundation in one go." In the blink of an eye, Kelly, who had returned to his human form, stood shoulder to shoulder with Han Shuo. He looked deeply at Snow Celestial Tiana, who was hovering in the air far away, shook his head, and sighed. He stared at Tiana and said, "Back then, your Shrine of Ice had destroyed the foundation of our druidic order in Kasi Empire, leaving not a single church for us to preach our doctrine. Even I myself had to leave after being injured by your and Corey's joint attack. I never thought that you would have such a day. The weather in Kasi Empire is frigid. This is the territory bestowed upon us by the Ice Goddess. Naturally, there shouldn't be any heresy in the territory of the Ice Goddess." Tiana looked at Kelly from afar, her expression cold and indifferent. She did not seem to be greatly affected by Corey's death. "There's nothing to say to her. Great Sage Kelly, let's do it." Han Shuo had no interest in the religious dispute between the two. All he wanted was to eradicate his enemy, Tiana. "It's no use. She's already prepared to leave." Kelly shook his head and said calmly. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment, then immediately fixed his gaze on Snow Celestial Tiana in the distance. He saw her body gradually fade, as though she had become a snowflake drifting in the wind. Han Shuo stared blankly at Tiana. He saw that the aura on her body had fused with the elements of water between heaven and earth. He could clearly see her, but he could not sense her aura. Gradually, Tiana was like a snowflake melting into water, disappearing bit by bit. He watched helplessly as Tiana disappeared bit by bit. He didn't appear to stop her. He knew that Tiana was standing so far away. If she wanted to leave wholeheartedly, given the compatibility between her soul and the water element, there was no way he could stop her. It wasn't until Tiana had completely disappeared from Han Shuo's sight that the squad of knights that had followed him arrived. Before these knights could speak, Kelly of the Druidic Order looked at Han Shuo and said, "Let's go. We'll talk somewhere else." On Profound Continent, people like us have a tacit understanding not to meddle in worldly disputes. Don't make things difficult for them. Nodding his head, Han Shuo followed behind Kelly, effortlessly avoiding the large squad of knights that had arrived with great difficulty. After wandering for a while, they arrived at a valley with lush vegetation. The little valley wasn't in Siro City, but in a medium-sized forest on the outskirts of the city. Upon arriving, Han Shuo discovered that Druid Lillian, who had left a step earlier during the Great Battle, was already waiting here. Contrary to Han Shua's expectations, apart from Lillian, Tanai, and a familiar face were also standing side by side with her, the great druid Caspian,
Sage. Master.
When the two saw Kelly and Han Shua arrive, they respectively saluted Kelly, though the way they addressed him was a little different. Caspian, long time no see. Han Shua took the initiative to greet Caspian when he saw him. Han Shua understood that the reason the old man had brought Han Shua here to have a good talk was to discuss the matter of the Druidic Order's Hand of the Goddess. But by now, Han Shua understood that the Druidic Order was indeed a righteous religion. He wasn't worried that they would set up some sort of trap against him. Of course, it was rare for an ordinary person to be able to trap someone whose strength had reached Han Shua's realm. Brian, long time no see. To think that you have already reached such heights. Caspian sighed from the bottom of his heart as he looked at Han Shua. When Han Shua first met Caspian in Valence City a few years ago, although Han Shua had already shown his brilliance, he was far from being as powerful as he was now. In the short span of a few years, Han Shua had the strength of a demigod, just like his master. Caspian couldn't help but gasp in admiration at such progress. Hee, that's all because I'm lucky. Han Shua laughed. All right, we can finally have a conversation without worries. Sage Kelly of the Druidic Order smiled faintly. His weather-beaten eyes focused on Han Shua. He suddenly let out a soft sigh and said helplessly, Brian, it's all thanks to your help this time. Otherwise, not only would it have been difficult to force Ice Celestial Corey to his death, I'm afraid that I would have suffered quite a bit under the combined might of the two of them. Sage, you're too kind. They are also my enemies. There's no need to talk about who helped who when we joined forces. You don't owe me anything. Han Shua knew what Kelly wanted to talk to him about, but he still replied courteously. Sure enough. After Kelly had said those words, he continued, logically speaking, you have helped us and obtained the hand of the goddess through your own abilities. We really shouldn't have any thoughts of taking it back. However, the hand of the goddess is the divine weapon of our Druidic order. As believers of the goddess of nature, it is our duty to take back the hand of the goddess. I really don't know what I should do. Han Shua had long anticipated that they had guessed that the hand of the goddess was in his hands. Now that things had come to this, Han Shua wouldn't play dumb. However, he also wouldn't hand the hand of the goddess over to them. Looking deeply at Kelly, Han Shua said, the item is indeed in my hands. I understand what it means to you, but it's even more important to me. I'm sorry, no matter what, I won't hand it over to you. Hearing Han Shua's words, the great druid Caspian opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he shook his head and sighed, not saying any words of persuasion. In his dealings with Han Shua, he didn't owe Caspian any favors. On the contrary, it was Caspian who had troubled Han Shua time and time again. Although the two of them had a small friendship, Caspian didn't think that Han Shua would change his mind for such a major matter. Therefore, he wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Mr. Brian, I know that with your identity and status, you definitely wouldn't care about gold coins. Then, the method that I suggested in the auction house earlier will definitely be useless. Lillian looked at Han Shua with sparkling eyes and continued. However, can you tell us how you know the miraculous use of the hand of the goddess? What do you want the hand of the goddess for? As far as I know, even among the followers of our Druidic order, not many have seen the hand of the goddess, much less know its miraculous use. Nodding, Sage Kelly of the Druidic order also stared at Han Shua, not concealing the curiosity in his heart in the slightest. He said, that's right. As the most devout follower of the Druidic order, even I only know a portion of the miraculous use of the hand of the goddess. I simply don't have the ability to make it fly away on its own. I really can't figure out how you can do it. After hearing Kelly's words, Han Shua immediately understood that Kelly must have been hiding somewhere in Brack's Manor and had seen some scenes. No wonder he was so certain that the hand of the goddess was in Han Shua's hands. After creasing his brows and hesitating for a moment, Han Shua considered whether or not he should tell them about the hand of the goddess and the Wood Elite zombie. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain this matter clearly. I know, this is your secret. However, Ever since I saw you use the hand of the goddess so miraculously, I've been wondering if you're an emissary sent by our goddess to the human world. Perhaps you're a member of our druidic order, Kelly said expectantly as he looked at Han Shuo. Han Shuo laughed involuntarily. He felt that some of the beliefs of these religious members were a little strange. He shook his head and said, I'm definitely not a follower of your druidic order, but I do have some understanding of the hand of the goddess that you speak of. Seeing that the 3 druids of the druidic order were all looking at him expectantly, Han Shuo nodded and slowly told them about his different understanding of the hand of the goddess. Virile leaf? What is that? Did I say that it's too outrageous? How is that possible? Lillian didn't believe what Han Shuo had said at all. She kept shaking her head and muttering in astonishment. Great Druid Caspian also had a face full of disbelief. He looked at Han Shuo with a puzzled expression, but didn't voice any doubts. Only the great sage Kelly, the leader of the Druidic order, looked at Han Shuo with a grave expression. He said in a low voice somewhat doubtful, Can you let me see the owner of the hand of the goddess? Chapter 504. Han Shuo shook his head resolutely. Under Kelly's astonished gaze, he said, The time is not right. What do you mean? Kelly was puzzled. Looking at the master of the hand of goddess, this shouldn't be a particularly difficult matter. He couldn't figure out why Han Shuo would so resolutely refuse. Just like Tiana needs time to fuse with the origin crystal of water, the master of the virile leaf is also slowly fusing with it. During this period of time, he needs absolute silence and cannot be disturbed, Han Shuo explained. Han Shuo's explanation only made Kelly even more puzzled. He looked at Han Shuo doubtfully and asked, If I heard correctly, you said that the master of the hand of goddess is a zombie warrior. A zombie warrior can fuse with the divine weapon of our druidic order, the hand of goddess. Is that what you mean? That's right. Han Shuo answered affirmatively. Old Kelly, who had lived for who knew how many years, had an unnatural paleness on his face. He subconsciously touched his chest with his right hand, as if he couldn't bear Han Shuo's explanation. He said with a slight tremble, I think, he shouldn't be an emissary of our goddess of nature. What a joke. How could a zombie warrior from the netherworld be an emissary of the goddess of nature to the mortal world? Of course not. Han Shuo smiled faintly and sized up the trio with interest. His gaze finally locked onto the muttering Kelly. He can't be an emissary of your goddess of nature. When he has mastered the virile leaf, I can let you meet him. So, the hand of goddess will become his weapon? Kelly asked with great reluctance after a low sigh. Although I feel a little helpless, I can only say that this is indeed the case. Han Shuo looked at Kelly apologetically and spread his hands. Soon after, an idea occurred to him and he continued, How about I compensate you with some gold coins? I'm really sorry. Judging from Lillian's performance, the Druidic Order was not a religion that was good at accumulating wealth. Towards the Druidic Order, Han Shuo really did have a good impression. Moreover, he had the intention of roping in Kelly, a demigod with astonishing strength, in an attempt to make some substantial compensation through gold coins. Forget it. This is the church's own negligence. We can't let you bear the consequences for us. Kelly waved his hand weakly and rejected Han Shuo's compensation. Looking at Kelly, and then at Caspian and Lillian, Han Shuo understood that there was nothing to say even if he stayed. He laughed dryly and said, I still have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. If the great sage is still interested in the master of the hand of goddess, you can come to Bretel City to find me next time. I will be more than happy to welcome you. In any case, the virile leaf should have come from the Druidic Order. Although he had seized it from Zophie's hands with his own ability, he had still taken something that belonged to him. Han Shuo understood the helplessness in the hearts of the 3 of them. He knew that it would be impossible for them to talk harmoniously if he stayed. It was better for him to leave as soon as possible to avoid the awkwardness. All right then, I will certainly make a trip to Bretel City when I have the time. No matter what, it was a pleasure to meet you. Kelly did not urge him to stay. He revealed a rather bitter smile and bade farewell to Han Shuo. Me too. Goodbye. Han Shuo replied politely. He then nodded at the great druid Caspian, turned around, and left the valley. After leaving the valley, Han Shuo did not immediately return to Zero City. Instead, he pondered on how to deal with the Shrine of Ice. With Ice Celestial Kori dead, the Shrine of Ice's strength had greatly declined in Han Shuo's eyes. Snow Celestial Tiana alone basically posed no threat to Han Shuo. The hatred of being betrayed on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light had always been engraved in Han Shuo's heart. It was just that Tiana had suddenly disappeared. Han Shuo had no idea where she had fled to, but he reckoned that she should be within the icy peaks of the Shrine of Ice. Because he needed to launch a sneak attack on Ice Celestial Kori, Han Shuo had concealed his consciousness. Now that he had left the valley, Han Shuo immediately released his consciousness again. He planned to continue provoking the six-horned tribal king of the soul race, luring him to the Shrine of Ice, and teach Tiana and the others a painful lesson. However, after Han Shuo released his consciousness, he suddenly discovered that the six-horned tribal king of the soul race had actually stopped in one place. He did not continue to chase after Han Shuo. This made Han Shuo somewhat puzzled. He did not understand why the six-horned tribal king would stop. Could it be that the old monster Statholm had yet to fuse his soul with the crystal of fighting aura and was coincidentally hiding in the middle of the six-horned tribal king's path? Could it be that the six-horned tribal king had sensed the old monster Statholm's presence and had conveniently dealt with the old monster Statholm first? Han Shuo was startled. He was startled by this thought. After carefully sensing with his consciousness, Han Shuo could roughly guess that the six-horned tribal king of the soul race was within the borders of Angela Empire. Shaking his head helplessly, Han Shuo was worried about Statholm. However, he did not recklessly head to Angela Empire to find out what was going on. Of course, if that was the case, the old monster Statholm would have already been killed before Han Shuo could head to Angela Empire. 2 days later, Han Shuo discovered that the six-horned tribal king was still within the borders of Angela Empire. No matter how Han Shuo provoked him, the tribal king still did not come to Kasi Empire to pursue and kill Han Shuo. With that, Han Shuo was almost certain that the six-horned tribal king did not stop because of Statholm the old monster. After all, the old monster Statholm's strength was not enough to resist the six-horned tribal king for 2 days. Although Han Shuo did not know what had happened in Angela Empire, it was obvious that the six-horned tribal king had been delayed there. Moreover, Han Shuo had no idea when the six-horned tribal king would leave Angela Empire. Han Shuo was very curious as to what had happened to the six-horned tribal king in Angela Empire. However, he wisely chose not to go and find out. Without this six-horned tribal king of the soul race, even if Han Shuo were to encounter Snow Celestial Tiana, he was not certain that he could kill her. Therefore, after some consideration, Han Shuo decided to temporarily give up on hunting down Tiana. He would wait until the little skull had fused with the origin crystal of death, and when Water Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie had further formed the Penta-Elemental Undead formation, before dealing with Tiana. Having lost one of their pillars, the strength of the Shrine of Ice had declined sharply. Han Shuo believed that the Druidic Order would also seize the opportunity to act. He was rather gloating over their misfortune. At noon, under the scorching sun, inside a mansion in the northern district of Zero City, Han Shuo stealthily snuck in. Before leaving Kasi Empire, he came to check on Sophie's condition and bid her farewell. In any case, Sophie had accompanied Han Shuo for a few days and had done her part as a host. Han Shuo had a rather favorable impression of Sophie. He was also somewhat worried that Sophie would be ruined in the hands of that good-for-nothing Brack. Therefore, he made a trip here before he left. When Han Shuo arrived at the mansion, he unfolded his consciousness and slowly searched for Sophie's aura. It didn't take long for Han Shuo to locate Sophie. However, when Han Shuo arrived at Sophie's location, he furrowed his brows deeply. It was a rather spacious room with 3 intricate and thick magical boundaries set up. It could be seen that the person who cast the boundaries was rather accomplished. They didn't affect the space or the items in the room, but still firmly trapped Sophie inside. Separated by 3 magical boundaries, Han Shuo could still clearly see Sophie. She was under house arrest and had a worried look on her face. She looked much more haggard than she had been 2 days ago. It seemed that she had been having a hard time. Frowning at Sophie, who was separated by 3 magical crystals, Han Shuo slowly released his consciousness and slowly sensed the location of his father, Sacred Knight Sulo. At this moment, Sacred Knight Sulo was training hard in his own practice room. It seemed that it was no mere fluke that he could become a sacred knight. After hesitating for a moment, Han Shuo reached out and pressed on the 3 magical boundaries. Demonic light glowed from his palm. Crack, crack, crack. The 3 magical boundaries shattered like mirrors. "Who is it?" Sophie was startled and cried out in alarm. "It's me." Han Shuo replied softly and strolled towards Sophie. He looked at the somewhat surprised Sophie and asked, "What's going on?" "It's nothing. My father doesn't allow me to run around. He's planning to marry me off to Brack in a few days." Sophie smiled bitterly and helplessly. For some reason, when he heard that Sulo was going to marry Sophie off to Brack, Han Shuo actually felt a vague sense of discomfort in his heart. A hint of anger flashed across his eyes. Han Shuo said, "Your father has gone senile. How could he have such a tyrannical way of doing things?" Sigh. Sophie shook her head and sighed. She replied somewhat wearily and powerlessly, "He's not senile. It's precisely because he's too smart that he's doing this. Otherwise, not only me and him, but even our family would no longer have a place to stand in Kasi Empire." Han Shuo was stunned for a moment before he sighed. He understood that what Sophie said was true. The power of a nation was not something that an individual could contend against. Unless that individual was like Han Shuo, possessing terrifying power that transcended the mundane world, there was absolutely no way he could go against a nation. In Kasi Empire, although Sacred Knight Sulo had quite a reputation, it was absolutely impossible for him to go against the House of Pilon. Moreover, the Shrine of Ice still existed in Kasi Empire. A mere Sulo would find it hard to even protect himself, let alone his entire family. "Brian, are you willing to take me with you?" While Han Shuo was letting his imagination run wild, Sophie suddenly looked deeply into Han Shuo's eyes and asked with a complicated expression. Chapter 505. Han Shuo stared blankly. He couldn't quite grasp the meaning behind Sophie's words. After weighing his words for a moment, Han Shuo said rather cautiously, "You are the city lord of Bretel City in Lancelot Empire. You possess the power to contend against the Shrine of Ice. Among the friends I know, I believe you are the only one who can help me. That is, of course, if you also consider me a friend." Sophie stared blankly at Han Shuo, as though trying to clearly see every change in expression on Han Shuo's face. She continued, "You are the city lord of Bretel City in Lancelot Empire. You possess the power to contend against the Shrine of Ice. Among the friends I know, I believe you are the only one who can help me. Of course, that is, if you also consider me a friend." From Sophie's words, Han Shuo understood that she had already guessed his true identity. After a slight hesitation, Han Shuo smiled and said, "I naturally consider you my friend. Bretel City will very much welcome your arrival." Sophie revealed a faint smile of gratification at Han Shuo's words. However, before she could say anything else, Sulo's voice suddenly sounded, "Nonsense." By the time his voice faded, Sulo had already appeared in front of Han Shuo and Sophie. His expression was very ugly. He glared at Sophie and angrily said, "Fei Fei, you are no longer a child. There are some things you should know the consequences of." Sophie clearly felt a little guilty after being glared at by her father. However, when she recalled the sullen matter of marrying Brack, Sophie stubbornly looked at Sulo and said, "Father, you shouldn't have helped me decide my marriage without my consent." Sulo, who was seething with rage, looked at his daughter who had a stubborn and unyielding expression. He suddenly felt a sense of powerlessness and dejection in his heart. He shook his head and sighed helplessly, saying, "Father was indeed rash in this matter. However, everyone knows that Brack likes you. Given the influence of the House of Pilon, there is simply no possibility of rejection. Although your father is a sacred knight and possesses a certain amount of influence in Kasi Empire, there is simply no way he can bargain with the House of Pilon." Han Shuo had long known that Sulo would come. Listening to the argument between father and daughter, Han Shua looked at Sophie and then at Sulo, who seemed to have aged considerably. He suddenly said, "Mr. Sulo, I do have a solution." Holy Paladin Sulo had sparred with Han Shua a few days ago, and after he had understood Han Shua's identity and strength through his own channels, he was truly fearful of this youth who was much younger than him. Hearing this, Sulo's expression was barely shaken. He looked at Han Shua and said, "Heroes come from the young. This saying is most appropriate for you. I imprisoned Sophie, on the one hand, to prevent Sophie from causing any trouble, and on the other hand, to wait for you." Han Shua was stunned, and then he was slightly puzzled as he asked, "What do you mean?" "Brian, I think I roughly know the relationship between you and Sophie." "All right, I'll just call you Brian. Currently, not many people know about the matter between you and Sophie. Given your status and strength, you can indeed protect us." To Han Shua's surprise, when Sulo said these words, he revealed some of the craftiness of an old fox, and his expression seemed a lot more relaxed. All of a sudden, Sophie's face inexplicably reddened. As if she knew what Sulo was going to say, she hastily said, "Father, it's not what you think." "Ian, all right, you don't have to say anything more. You know what you mean." Without waiting for Sophie to finish her sentence, Sulo waved his hand and stopped her from continuing. He said self-righteously, "After considering it for a few days, I've decided to respect your opinion. You and Brian are a good match. I've even arranged for some personnel transfers in the family. Now that Brian is here, we can discuss things and withdraw from Kasi Empire as soon as possible, moving to Bredel City to live." At these words, Sophie's face turned beet red, and she hurriedly waved her hands, saying, "No, it's not like that. Father, you've misunderstood." "Humph." Sulo fiercely glared at Sophie and said, "Now that things have come to this, why are you still trying to be secretive? Our family is about to be destroyed because of you. You can't go on fooling around like this." Turning around, Sulo looked at Han Shua with the gaze of a father-in-law looking at his son-in-law. Soon after, he smiled faintly, seemingly very satisfied. He nodded and said, No matter how I look at it, you're more observant than that crafty Brack. Sophie has a good eye." Taking a deep breath, Sulo solemnly said, "Brian, although my Sophie can be a little mischievous at times, she's still very kind. You can't bully my Sophie, okay?" Han Shua was dumbfounded. Looking at Sulo, who had taken matters into his own hands, he simply didn't know what to say. It had to be said that this sacred knight Sulo was indeed a remarkable character. It was normal for him to misunderstand the relationship between himself and Sophie. After all, Sophie had indeed been very close to him these past few days. In addition, Sophie had been vehemently opposed to her marriage with Brack recently. As a father, it was normal for him to have such a misunderstanding. However, this Sulo was truly a man of swift, decisive, and cunning. He had imprisoned Sophie. On one hand, he wouldn't let anyone know of their relationship, and on the other hand, he was testing whether he would really come for Sophie. On top of that, without anyone noticing, he had begun to quietly mobilize the forces of his family, making preparations to leave for Bredel City at any time. Although this Sulo had misunderstood the relationship between himself and Sophie, he was truly a remarkable character. A series of thoughts flashed through Han Shua's mind. Han Shua's eyes shone brightly as he sized up Sulo. His mind raced. A sacred knight was a considerable force to be reckoned with in any country. Even if he left Kasi Empire, Sulo could still lead Sophie and his family to establish a foothold in other countries without relying on him. A sacred knight. No country would refuse him, especially a country that was hostile to Kasi Empire. This old fellow was definitely not simple. He was indeed a formidable character. Han Shua inwardly came to a conclusion about Sulo. Han Shua, who had intended to clarify the facts, suddenly had a thought. He revealed a modest smile and assured Sulo, "How could I? I can't wait to dote on Sophie. How could I bear to bully her?" Face flushed to the ears, Sophie was anxious to explain the truth to her father. When she heard Han Shua's words, it was as if she had received a heavy blow. She glared fiercely at Han Shuo and cried out even more anxiously, "Father, father, don't listen to his nonsense. He and I." With a wave of his hand, Sulo once again interrupted Sophie's explanation and said, "He's not spouting nonsense. I believe he will take good care of you. Brian is not like Brack. He is a martial artist, not a politician. I can trust the promises of a martial artist, especially a martial artist stronger than I am. I trust him even more." Sophie was about to faint from anger. Every time she tried to explain, he would abruptly interrupt her, and then he would deepen the misunderstanding. That self-assured look on his face left Sophie at a complete loss of what to do. What made Sophie gnash her teeth with even greater hatred was still Han Shuo. Han Shuo had the appearance of a good son-in-law as he solemnly guaranteed, "Yes, I will." Sophie was both embarrassed and anxious. It was as if she had unknowingly been sold. The two traffickers were even laughing and discussing the details right in front of her. It was an indescribably bizarre feeling. However, there seemed to be a little bit of joy. It was just that little bit of joy was quickly ignored by Sophie in the midst of her great embarrassment and anxiety. How could this be? How could this be? Sophie screamed again and again in her heart. When Sulo finally finished, she glared angrily at Han Shuo again. She straightened her face and prepared to make things clear. "Yes, you two talk for a while. I will immediately go and handle the family's mobilization, striving to transfer the family's power to Bretel City in the shortest time possible. Oh, when the time comes, I may have to trouble my dear son-in-law. After all, you are the lord of Bretel City. Your power can also allow us to leave Kasi Empire more quickly and safely." Without waiting for Sophie to organize her words, Sulo dropped another bomb. Of course, of course." Han Shuo smiled very modestly. He was happy that he had gotten a sacred night for free. As for what would happen next, Han Shuo didn't care for the time being. In any case, he had to lure Sacred Knight Sulo to Bretel City first. Once the Sulo family arrived at Bretel City, even if the truth was exposed, Han Shuo believed that they wouldn't be able to leave so easily. Sulo seemed to be very satisfied with Han Shuo. He walked up to Han Shuo with a smile, patted Han Shuo on the shoulder, and nodded, as if a huge stone had been lifted from his heart. He walked out with much more relaxed footsteps than when he came. It seemed that he really was going to make arrangements for leaving Kasi Empire. Sophie had planned to stop Sulo and give him a good explanation, but Han Shuo desperately signaled with his eyes to stop her. After Sulo left, Sophie immediately put her hands on her hips and glared at him like a little hen about to fight. She said angrily, "Brian, you bastard! What is the meaning of this?" Spreading his hands, Han Shuo smiled and said, "I'm doing this for you and your family. If I didn't say this, would your father have gone to Bretel City so easily?" Han Shuo put on an innocent look as if he was doing all this for Sophie's sake. Sophie, who had planned to denounce Han Shuo for his crimes, suddenly froze when she heard Han Shuo's words. Sophie was a smart person. It only took her a moment to realize that Han Shuo's words made sense. However, when Sophie recalled that Han Shuo had used this sort of thing as an excuse to convince her father, and looked at Han Shuo's smiling face, she couldn't help but feel angry. She still angrily charged at Han Shuo, shouting, "Even so, you can't joke about something like this. I'm going to teach you a lesson." Chapter 506. Sophie was no match for Han Shuo. Panting with rage, she charged at him. Han Shuo merely looked at her with a smile, neither retaliating nor resisting. He took Sophie's hammering blows on his chest and cooperated with her by laughing and crying out in pain. Sophie's soft little hand hammered on his chest. Not only did Han Shuo not feel the slightest bit of pain, he even felt rather pleased. Although Sophie charged at him with bared fangs and brandished claws, she still had a sense of propriety when she struck. Given Han Shuo's abnormally strong body, he naturally wouldn't be injured in the slightest. After hitting him for a while, Sophie finally realized that all her efforts were in vain. Looking at Han Shuo's hateful face, she didn't know how to vent her anger. She could only glare at Han Shuo a few times. All right. Han Shuo said a few words of consolation. Smiling, he said, I'm doing this to make your father feel at ease. Only in this way will he head to Brettel City without any misgivings. When he arrives at Brettel City, you can properly communicate with him. At that time, even if he complains, nothing will happen. Sophie and Han Shuo played around for a while. Her originally anxious mood was released. After thinking for a moment, she couldn't help but say, there are still some members in our family. It will be rather difficult for all of them to head to Brettel City unknowingly. Fortunately, Kasi Empire is in a mess because of you these days. Because my father is a sacred knight, he has absolute authority in the family. With a little more time, there shouldn't be any trouble. All right, take advantage of the fact that Brack doesn't have time to deal with you these days. You'd better move your people as soon as possible. I will communicate with my people. There shouldn't be any problems, said Han Shuo. Oh right, what happened that day? Why did the Shrine of Ice suddenly issue an ice goddess writ, summoning all the bishops of Kasi Empire to return to the frozen peak of Snowy Mountain? Sophie couldn't help but ask Han Shuo with a frown. Ice Celestial Corey's death must have been suppressed by the Shrine of Ice. Otherwise, it would have had an immeasurable impact on both the Shrine of Ice and Kasi Empire. The reason why Tiana had issued the Ice Goddess writ and summoned the bishops of every region to the main peak of the snowy region was obviously to concentrate their power. It's nothing. It's probably to deal with us, Han Shuo replied casually. In any case, Sophie was a citizen of Kasi Empire. She should have a favorable impression of the Shrine of Ice. If she knew that Han Shuo had forced one of the Shrine of Ice's highest leaders, Ice Celestial Corey, to his death, who knew what she would think? Oh, I see. Sophie looked at Han Shuo with a somewhat complicated expression. She suddenly sighed and said, I am a citizen of Kasi Empire. If I leave like this, I might never be able to return. No matter what, I still hope you won't harm the common people of Kasi Empire. Don't worry, I won't attack ordinary people. I'll make some arrangements and leave Kasi Empire today. The next time we meet, we should be in Brettel City. Han Shuo looked at Sophie and said, Are you leaving today? So soon? Sophie suddenly felt a little reluctant after hearing Han Shuo's words. Her tone was also a little gloomy. But before I leave, I will make some arrangements. With my instructions, your family's departure from Kasi Empire will be smoother. In addition, Brettel City is currently at war with the 7 Grand Duchies. I want to see what's going on over there, Han Shuo said. Parting was always a little sad. In order to prevent Sophie's mood from worsening, Han Shuo smiled and said, All right, I'll leave first. I reckon we can meet again in Brettel City before long. Send my regards to your father. Tell him that Brettel City will open its gates and welcome your arrival. Without waiting for Sophie to say anything, Han Shuo elegantly left. Under Sophie's gaze, he turned into a faint shadow and rapidly disappeared. After leaving Sophie's place, Han Shuo arrived at a Dark Mantle stronghold in Kasi Empire. He communicated with the person in charge of the Dark Mantle base here and sent his message to the Dark Mantle stronghold in Brettel City through them. He also instructed them to contact Sulo and help the Sulo family travel to Brettel City. The Dark Mantle stronghold had been operating in Siro City for many years and had very tight exit channels. Han Shuo believed that with their help, the Sulo family's journey would be smoother. Taking advantage of the chaos in Kasi Empire over the past few days, Han Shuo believed that with the old fox Sulo's power and the help of the Dark Mantle, there shouldn't be any problems. The 6-horned tribal king of the Soul race was still lingering in Angela Empire. When Han Shuo headed for Lancelot Empire, he concealed his consciousness again and unhurriedly arrived at the Dark Forest, preparing to pass through it and return to the Cemetery of Death. Midway, Han Shuo suddenly sensed the joy of the little skull in the netherworld. Having just entered the Dark Forest from Caesar City, Han Shuo was overjoyed. Without thinking too much, Han Shuo knew that the little skull must have fused his soul with the origin crystal of necromancy. The little skull already possessed astonishing strength. Once it fused with the origin crystal of the pure element of death, it would surely bring an even greater surprise to Han Shuo. The impatient Han Shuo found a secluded cave and summoned Metal Elite Zombie to open up a stone room. He then took out the skeletal staff and made some arrangements in the surroundings. Shortly after, his consciousness passed through the space tunnel and arrived at the netherworld where the aura of death was the densest. Although they also felt the summoning from the peak of the 10,000 meters tall mountain, as kings of the undead world for many years, they already had the ability to get rid of that summoning power. Moreover, they were trying to completely destroy this extremely daring existence. Father, you're here. Just as Han Shuo was gazing into the distance, the Earth Elite Zombie suddenly walked out from the center of the palace. Behind the Earth Elite Zombie, the Fire Elite Zombie and the Metal Elite Zombie also walked out side by side. Han Shuo could feel the joy in their hearts. Yes, Han Shuo answered. He could feel that at the bottom of the palace at the peak of the huge mountain, Water Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie were concentrating on absorbing and digesting the energy. It seemed that the next time they came out, the Penta-Elemental Undead formation would be truly completed. At the center of the palace, the little skull sitting on the white bone throne was still madly absorbing the aura of death within a radius of 100 miles. Strands of dense aura of death slowly flowed into the little skull's smooth bones. His entire body was filled with the incomparably pure element of death. Han Shuo suddenly understood that after the soul of the little skull fused with the origin crystal of death, not only did he form the soul of element, but he was also using the ability to manipulate the element of death to rapidly form the body of element. The soul of element and the body of element were the foundations of becoming a god. Han Shuo did not expect that the origin crystal of death would not only allow the little skull to possess the soul of element, but also magically allow him to possess the body of element. Once the soul of element and the body of element were formed, he was only one step away from becoming a god. Chapter 507. Undead creatures as far as the eye could see, as though on a pilgrimage, swarmed towards the 10,000-meter tall mountain peak. At this moment, Little Skull was the most famous undead king within a 100-mile radius. The aura of death madly surged towards the palace and was absorbed by Little Skull, who sat on the throne of white bones, into his sparkling and translucent white bone body. Little Skull's incomparably tough and tyrannical bones were rapidly transformed, forming a body of element that was most compatible with the element of death. Metal Elite Zombies, Earth Elite Zombies, and Fire Elite Zombies stood in 3 different directions in front of the palace. The 3 undead creatures were equally unordinary. Behind them stood a few evil knights and a mummy Lord Bone Demon, firmly guarding the undead king inside the palace. The 2 bone dragons and the zombie king roared as they charged forward. Wherever they passed, the low-level undead creatures that had betrayed them would be crushed into bones by their tyrannical strength. One by one, the resentful spirits would be annihilated. The 3 extremely powerful existences of the netherworld, carrying with them a monstrous rage, rapidly walked towards the top of the mountain peak. During this process, Little Skull had already absorbed all the aura of death within a 100-mile radius, forming a body of element.
Father,
Little Skull finally walked out of the palace and stood at the top of the mountain, looking down at the undead creatures that swarmed towards him. When Han Shuo saw that Little Skull had come out, he couldn't help but carefully size up Little Skull's current appearance. His whole body of pure white bones was filled with a jade-like luster, and every inch of his bones contained an enormous aura of death. A cloud of dusky smoke constantly revolved in the center of the skull. It was as inconspicuous as the eternal darkness of the netherworld, but Han Shuo understood that it was the soul of element condensed by Little Skull. When Han Shuo looked at Little Skull, he could sense that the soul of element at the center of Little Skull's skull had fused with the omnipresent aura of death in the netherworld. Even so, this newly reforged body of Little Skull also gave Han Shuo a strange feeling. It was as if the little skull in front of him had existed in this netherworld for thousands of years, as if he had always been the true undead king of the netherworld. 2 bone dragons and a zombie king have come. They are not affected by your power, Han Shuo said. I deliberately lured them here. Father, just watch, they will still crawl under my feet. Little Skull was incomparably confident. He slowly walked in front of Han Shuo, his purple demon eye glistening with evil light. An indescribable power spread out like water ripples, fusing with the aura of death between heaven and earth. As though it was an order, after Little Skeleton emitted this energy, the tens of thousands of undead creatures that were rushing to the summit of the giant mountain, as though they were on a pilgrimage, suddenly all prostrated themselves on the ground. None of them moved an inch and only lowered their heads, as though waiting for Little Skeleton's next order. Han Shuo could see that among the undead creatures that covered the entire mountain, only a small portion were Little Skull's original subordinates. Most of the undead creatures were outsiders who had heard the summons from the mountain peak. Most of them were originally following the two bone dragons and the king zombie. It was only because they were attracted by Little Skeleton's miraculous energy that they instinctively gathered at the mountain peak. Under Little Skull's divine might, they all crawled on the ground, not daring to move. Only the three bone dragons and the zombie king, who had existed for who knew how many years, were not affected by Little Skull's power. They roared all the way to the top of the mountain. "Is it you, challenging my dignity?" When the three undead creatures that stood at the top of the pyramid of the netherworld arrived in front of Little Skull, one of the bone dragons emitted a powerful corrosive aura and spewed out long dragon's breath. Its body floated above the mountain, looking down at Little Skull from above. "Unruly existence, you will pay the price." The huge body of the zombie king roared at the sky, emitting its tyrannical corpse aura that could make low-level undead creatures willingly submit. It seemed very irritable and angry. "Strange existence, I will absorb your soul and erase the fact that you once existed." The last bone dragon swayed its tail and appeared in the sky behind Little Skull. It looked greedily at the soul inside Little Skull's skull. "You three lowly fellows, immediately submit to me. Otherwise, only death awaits you." Little Skull commanded the three powerful undead creatures in an extremely arrogant manner, as if it was their destiny. As soon as he finished speaking, Little Skull emitted an incomparably dense death energy. All of a sudden, the element of death that was everywhere in the surroundings began to boil like boiling water. Little Skull's originally short body began to grow taller and taller. In the blink of an eye, Little Skull had grown to a height of 7 or 8 meters, covered with ferocious bone spikes. At first glance, one could tell that it was evil and terrifying. A 5-meter-long bone spike, emitting an extremely sharp death energy, was easily grasped in the palm of its hand. On its back, the 7 bone spikes were 3 times longer than before. They were ferocious like terrifying fangs, shining with a bewitching and evil luster, giving off a strong sense of shock. The Little Skull that had suddenly grown in size, and the power that looked down on all living things, burst out in full force. In an instant, the three creatures that swore to vent their anger on him felt an instinctive fear in their hearts. All of them involuntarily kept a distance from him. "Submit to me. Otherwise, your lowly souls will be thoroughly obliterated," Little Skull said in an evil tone, once again destroying their willpower. "Two bone dragons. The 3 of us will join forces and slay this powerful being." The king zombie took a few steps back. As soon as Little Skull's arrogant words faded, he immediately took a few more steps forward, raised his head, and proposed to the 2 bone dragons that were hovering in the air. Not bad. They fiercely charged at Little Skull one after the other. The attacks that had been brewing in their bodies for a long time erupted in an instant. The king zombie ferociously charged over. The surrounding corpse aura was even sharper than a sharp sword. It carried an unstoppable and terrifying energy. With a stretch of his hand, Little Skull stopped metal, fire, and earth elite zombies from helping and said, "I'll do it." Han Shuo, who originally planned to join forces with metal and fire elite zombies, simultaneously received Little Skull's dissuading message. An absolute confidence emanated from Little Skull. At this moment, it was as though he was the true king of the netherworld since ancient times. No undead creature could offend the dignity of this king of undead. Han Shuo hesitated for a moment before retreating to the side of wood, metal, and fire elite zombies. He watched the cruel battle that was about to unfold from afar and concentrated his energy, ready to join the fray the moment Little Skull showed signs of defeat. 2 bone dragons, and a king zombie. These were powerful undead creatures that only a sacred magus necromancer could summon. Even on the profound continent, existences of this level were powerful creatures that would give anyone a headache. In the netherworld, the aura of death was extremely dense. Han Shuo, who had only arrived here with his consciousness, did not have the confidence to deal with any existence of this level. Roar! Little Skull let out a disdainful howl. Mixed with the aura of death, it drifted to a radius of several tens of miles. His enormous body did not draw support from the 7 bone spurs on his back as he stood proudly in the air. The 5-meter-long bone spur in his hand was like the most incisive weapon in the netherworld. With a light spin, he thrust it at the bone dragon that had launched a sneak attack behind him like a bolt of lightning. Clang! The bone spur was like lightning. Without giving the bone dragon any time to dodge, it directly pierced through several of its bones and sent its enormous body flying backwards. Bam! After the bone spur pierced out, he did not even look at it. He suddenly landed on the side of the king zombie and kicked downwards. An enormous aura of death gathered at the sole of his white bony foot. He stomped on one of the king zombie's shoulders with the force of 1,000 caddies. Crunch! The king zombie staggered backwards. Before the other bone dragon in front of him could approach, Little Skull slapped the king zombie's head. With a puff, the king zombie's head was smashed into a pulp. A glossy green soul was pulled out by Little Skull. "My king, I am willing to serve you. From now on, I will serve you as my only master." The king zombie whose soul was pulled out by Little Skull immediately shouted, without the slightest hesitation. "Smart guy." Little Skull lightly groaned. The jade-like bone claws carried the zombie king's soul as it fiercely smashed towards the bone dragon in front of it. The bone dragon's acid mixed with the dragon's breath fell down like rain. The zombie king's soul screamed and hurriedly used all of its strength to condense corpse chi. Its soulless body suddenly flew out and crashed into the bone dragon. Thump! The bone dragon smashed into the king zombie's physical body, while Little Skull's punch punched the king zombie's soul into his physical body. The king zombie desperately entangled the bone dragon. Little Skull pulled out his fist and landed behind the bone dragon like a ghost. The bone dragon was shocked and struggled desperately. However, it was entangled by this ally of his, not giving him any chance at all. One could imagine how depressed the bone dragon was. It roared madly and cursed the king zombie for being shameless. The king zombie, who was frightened by Little Skull, understood that Little Skull's strength was not something he could contend against. Therefore, he wisely chose to surrender. Now was naturally the best time to show his loyalty. "Bone dragon, do you really want to die?" Little Skull stood behind the bone dragon. A bone claw had unknowingly appeared and touched the back of the bone dragon's neck. Chapter 508. The king zombie hugged the bone dragon. When the Little Skull's voice rang out, he knew he was done for. A fear that penetrated deep into his soul suddenly spread. The next moment, the bone dragon felt as if his soul was imprisoned. The evil power overwhelmed him, and he could not perform any follow-up attacks. The bone dragon's huge body suddenly trembled. A mountain-like gravity pressed down on the back of his neck through the hand pressing down on him. This force was so strong that he could not match it. Under this great force, his entire body had no choice but to be pressed down inch by inch. Han Shuo's divine sense was everywhere. He could clearly sense that the Little Skull's hand was pressing down on the bone dragon's neck. The huge death aura in the surroundings gathered on the Little Skull's hand, pressing down on the bone dragon in midair inch by inch, not giving the bone dragon any room to resist. The strength of the Little Skull that had formed the elemental soul and elemental body was so strong that Han Shuo could not believe it. Even if Han Shuo's divine sense returned to his physical body, he would not be able to do as he pleased in the undead realm like the Little Skull. The aura of death in the netherworld was extremely dense. The little skeleton formed by the soul of element and body of element could sufficiently mobilize the aura of death to form all kinds of attacks. In the netherworld, this kind of advantage of his was simply overwhelming. It was no wonder that the king zombie and the bone dragon did not even have the power to retaliate in his hands. Until now, Han Shuo, who had been unable to estimate the true strength of the little skull, was certain that the little skull had at least the strength of a demigod. After forming the elemental soul and elemental body, he was only one step away from becoming a true god. Han Shuo suddenly realized that he did not have to worry about the little skull in the undead realm anymore. Bang! The bone dragon, whose neck was pressed all the way to the mountain peak by the little skull, suddenly fell to the ground with its huge body. I surrender, undead king. Finally, the bone dragon expressed the fear in its heart while trembling. Powerful existence, following behind you is our true home. After the zombie king's soul was pressed back into its body by the little skull, it used the omnipresent aura of death to restore its head, which had been smashed by the little skull, and hurriedly expressed its loyalty. Well, it's not easy for you to evolve to this stage. If your soul is destroyed, you will no longer be able to exist, the little skull said in a dignified tone, and let go of the bone hand that was pressing on the back of the bone dragon's neck. All of a sudden, little skeleton dashed out like a bolt of lightning and arrived in front of the last bone dragon in an instant. This bone dragon, who had a few of his bones pierced by Little Skull's bone spear, was now desperately trying to escape. It seemed that he already understood that he was no match for Little Skull, so he did not want to get involved in this mess and planned to leave as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the Little Skull's current strength was not something he could contend against, especially when the bone spear in Little Skull's hand was still stuck in the bone dragon's body. A ray of light streaked across the sky, and the little skull had already landed in front of the escaping bone dragon. Before the bone dragon could react, he grabbed the bone spear that was stuck in the bone dragon's body. His purple demon eye shone brightly, and he slowly turned the bone spear in his hand. The bones of the bone dragon made a cracking sound as they shattered one by one. He suddenly howled miserably and struggled in the air, shouting, "Master, great master, I know I was wrong." Unexpectedly, he was also a coward. In the netherworld, survival of the fittest was the rule. When a low-level creature encountered a high-level existence, there were only two choices: to submit or to be absorbed by the strong. Since the beginning of the netherworld, low-level undead creatures knew how to survive in front of high-level creatures. When this bone dragon realized that he could not even escape, he clearly knew what choice he had to make. Very well, offer your soul and form a contract with me. From now on, I will be your master, and you will be my slave, until one of us has our soul turned into ashes. The little skull stood in front of the bone dragon and stretched out his hand to make a strange soul contract. A strange oval magical brand suddenly formed between his hands. After the successful release of the soul contract, the bone dragon only hesitated for a moment before obediently offering his soul, which slowly fell into the magical brand between the little skull's hands. The other bone dragon and the king zombie also obediently walked over. Without waiting for the little skull's orders, they voluntarily offered their souls and fell into the magical brand made by the little skull. The souls of the three extremely powerful undead creatures in the netherworld fell into the magical brand between the little skull's hands. At this moment, an evil force suddenly rushed out from the little skull's palms. The soul of element in the little skull's skull also slowly flew out and wrapped around the magical brand bit by bit. A magical contract that even Han Shuo did not know about was suddenly formed. Han Shuo looked at the contact between the four souls and understood that the little skull's soul had completely occupied the dominant role and did not allow the other three creatures to have the slightest bit of autonomy. Gradually, the soul of element of Little Skull was returned to the bone dragon. With a sudden hand seal, the souls of the three powerful creatures suddenly fell into their original bodies in 3 straight lines. Master! The 2 bone dragons and the king zombie suddenly prostrated themselves at the feet of the little skull and respectfully called out to the little skull in unison. The 3 powerful undead creatures that came in anger, faced with the little skull who had evolved to a whole new realm, had almost no room for resistance. Just like that, they were forced to enter into a master-slave contract, swearing eternal loyalty to him. Han Shuo had to admit that the little skull was becoming more and more inconceivable. When he recalled how he used to help him throw out the trash every morning, Han Shuo really had an indescribable feeling of sorrow. In just a few short years, Han Shuo had turned from a useless odd-job worker to the lord of a city in the Lancelot Empire, possessing strength comparable to a demigod. In just a few short years, a skinny and useless low-level skeleton warrior had continuously evolved and climbed to the peak that the Bone Dragon and King Zombie willingly submitted to. Sometimes, life was just so inconceivable, so full of changes, so magical. Very good. The three of you can be considered tactful. Otherwise, you would have been turned into ashes by now, and all traces of your existence would have been completely erased. The little skull's purple demon eye glistened as it looked at the three newly recruited slaves prostrating themselves on the ground, proudly narrating the facts. Master, only by following behind you can we advance further. Such a great existence like you will definitely bring us a wider world. The last bone dragon immediately started to flatter. It seemed that he was rather intelligent. Compared to the low-level undead creatures that were everywhere, these powerful existences at the top of the pyramid not only possessed terrifying strength, but their intelligence was also far higher than those low-level undead creatures. Just from their intelligent submission and their somewhat inexperienced flattery, it could be seen that they were all materials that could be molded. Roar! A resonant howl mixed with a sinister and terrifying energy was released from the little skull's body. In an instant, the undead creatures that were prostrating themselves on the ground all stood up one by one. They were like soldiers waiting for their general's orders as they looked at the little skull at the peak of the giant mountain. The undead creatures were very sensitive to levels. The fact that the three former kings had suddenly submitted to the little skull was already known to them through language. Now that the little skull that summoned them had proven his strength with unparalleled strength, these undead creatures instinctively felt fear. From today onwards, the three of you will continue to command your original subordinates. With this giant mountain as the center, expand to all the surrounding areas. If you encounter an existence that you can't contend against, immediately report to me. The little skull was really like a general commanding thousands of troops and horses as he methodically commanded the power that came out of nowhere. Yes, Master. Your Majesty as a king will be spread to every corner of the undead world by us. The three powerful undead creatures said in unison. Good. Take your original subordinates and retreat. The little skull ordered in high spirits. With the little skull's order, the undead creatures that were rushing over as if on a pilgrimage slowly retreated from the top of the giant mountain. The three roaring high-level undead creatures once again became the masters of the traitors. They were ready to lead them to charge and break through enemy lines to expand the territory of the little skull. This time, the summoning from the little skull made the undead creatures within a radius of a few hundred miles realize a fact. The little skull was the true king of the undead here. After lying dormant for a long time, the little skull's reappearance this time was indeed shocking. Han Shuo, who had a panoramic view of everything, suddenly realized that the little skull had really changed. Unknowingly, he had become an expert that could no longer be ignored. In the undead world, the little skull was a true king. All the undead creatures had to crawl under his feet. Han Shuo believed that with the little skull's existence, Han Shuo would have an undead army of thousands of men and horses. The more powerful the little skull became in the undead world, the more solid Han Shuo's foundation would become. The little skull that he had unintentionally created had now grown to this extent. Han Shuo was filled with emotion. These super-rank magical beasts that had lived for God knows how long all wisely stayed far away from Han Shuo, fearing that Han Shuo would suddenly have evil intentions and attack them. The cemetery of death was at the edge of the dark forest. Han Shuo had come and gone through the dark forest countless times, but he'd never gone so deep into the dark forest as he was now. The deepest parts of the vast and boundless dark forest had always been synonymous with mystery. For so many years, the number of adventurers and challengers who had come and gone from the dark forest were as many as the hairs on an ox. However, no one dared to say that they had walked through the entire dark forest, and that they could come and go as they pleased in the deepest parts of the dark forest. In the past, on one hand, he didn't have enough strength, and on the other hand, he didn't have much time. Therefore, even though Han Shuo had come to the dark forest many times, he had never seriously and carefully explored the deepest parts of the dark forest. Now that Han Shuo possessed demigod strength, he felt that the depths of the dark forest would no longer threaten his safety. Therefore, he decided to make a trip to the deepest parts of the dark forest. From Kasi Empire's Caesar City to the Valley of Sunshine, one indeed had to pass through the dark forest. However, it was also at the edge of the dark forest. The deepest parts of the dark forest were like a mysterious world. It seemed that no one had ever been able to explore it and know the specific situation within. Very soon, Han Shuo arrived at that forbidden area. Han Shuo clearly remembered his experience with the Golden Dragon and the Cyclops in this place. It was also in this place that Han Shuo obtained the personal notes of the founding experts of Lancelot Empire and saw the bones of all kinds of super-rank magical beasts. Revisiting this place, Han Shuo discovered that this place was no longer the same as before, where there were layers upon layers of obstructive power. Just like other places in the dark forest, this place was overgrown with weeds over the past few years. All kinds of magical beasts lived peacefully here. Even further away, Han Shuo could sense the presence of super-rank magical beasts. However, these super-rank magical beasts were just as quiet and not savage enough to kill in all directions. Huh! Han Shuo exclaimed softly. He sensed that there were two super-rank magical beasts fighting a few miles to his left. It seemed that the battle was very intense. Han Shuo, who had originally come here with the intention of sightseeing, headed to the battle area after hearing the news. Not long after, he saw a beautiful unicorn fighting a Cyclops. With just a glance, Han Shuo recognized the Cyclops. It was the same one he had encountered in the forbidden area. Unicorns were known as the purest of magical beasts. Their horns had the miraculous effect of purifying evil and detoxifying all poisons. The unicorn was as fast as lightning and could skillfully control lightning and wind magic. Beneath its beautiful appearance was a body that was not inferior to that of the dragon race. This unicorn ought to be an adult. Its single horn flickered with a dazzling 7-colored divine light. One moment, it was pure white like jade, and the next moment, it was multicolored. Coupled with its ethereal figure, it was simply like a vivid work of art. This beautiful unicorn was bouncing about in the lush, ancient trees. With a single step, it could cross dozens of meters. As its horns shone with a beautiful luster, arcs of lightning and blades of wind fell unceremoniously on the Cyclops that Han Shuo had encountered before. The colossal Cyclops was actually unable to gain the upper hand in a battle against the unicorn that could be said to be more refined. Rays of magic fell on the Cyclops, and the Cyclops had no choice but to defend in a flurry. Although it possessed boundless power, it wasn't as agile as the unicorn. Not a single one of its attacks could truly land on the unicorn. Instead, it was the loser that was at a disadvantage. Han Shuo watched for a while and found it very interesting. He didn't expect this unicorn to be so miraculous. Such a beautiful and powerful unicorn. If I could capture it and gift it to Fanny and Phoebe, they would definitely be ecstatic. Han Shuo suddenly had this thought. Soon after, Han Shuo suddenly realized that of the 3 women, Phoebe, Emily, and Fanny, only Fanny hadn't obtained any particularly valuable treasures from him. He had gifted Phoebe the divine artifact, Starry Sky, and Emily had not only obtained the demigod Ermika Cotton's letter and staff from him, but also an origin crystal of darkness. Instead, it was Fanny who had never obtained anything from him. As he thought of this, Han Shuo suddenly felt guilty. When he returned this time, no matter what, he had to gift Fanny a valuable treasure. Otherwise, wouldn't it show that he was biased? Not only did the unicorn have a flawless and beautiful appearance, but it also possessed miraculous power. Probably no woman could resist such a magical pet. Thus, Han Shuo planned to capture it no matter what and force it to form a contract with Fanny. This could be considered as making up for all the years he had owed Fanny. The unicorn really was a rather intelligent super-rank magical beast. When Han Shuo, who had been lurking in the shadows, was within 300 meters of it, it had already sensed him. Then, several arcs of lightning shot towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo was stunned, thinking that this unicorn was a restless little fellow. He reached out with both hands and pulled, and the lightning bolts were like thin threads that had been torn apart, shattering and disappearing. Seeing that he had been discovered, Han Shuo decided not to hide anymore. He walked out from behind a towering ancient tree, chuckling as he looked at the vigilant unicorn in front of him. He revealed a seemingly amiable smile and greeted, "Hi." Before Han Shuo could say anything, yet another few bolts of lightning and a large field of wind blades whizzed over. Han Shuo forced a smile and continued to stretch out his hand to shoot at the sky, shattering the attacks unleashed by the unicorn. Suddenly, the Cyclops cried out in surprise, "Oh, it's you, mighty demigod existence." This wasn't the first time the Cyclops had seen Han Shuo. Last time in the Forbidden Land, Han Shuo had absorbed a large amount of energy and entered a demonic state, leaving an unforgettable impression on the Cyclops. At that time, the Cyclops had misunderstood Han Shuo's power and had taken the powerful Han Shuo to be a demigod existence. After a few years, when they met again, Han Shuo indeed possessed the power of a demigod. He was no longer a demigod that needed to borrow external power to become stronger. Thus, this time, the Cyclops calmly acknowledged the way the Cyclops addressed Han Shuo. He chuckled and said to the Cyclops, "Long time no see. What's wrong? Did you run into some trouble?" This unicorn is really difficult to deal with. I only took a few stones from its territory, and it chased me relentlessly." "What a troublesome fellow," the Cyclops complained with a crying face. As Han Shuo and the Cyclops spoke, the unicorn's gem-like eyes stared at Han Shuo and the Cyclops. It seemed to think that Han Shuo was the Cyclops' friend, and it quickly fled like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. After 2 missed attacks, the unicorn clearly knew that Han Shuo was even more terrifying than the Cyclops, so it didn't dare to stay. What a clever little fellow. Chapter 510. Unfortunately, its opponent this time wasn't the Cyclops. Although the Cyclops was large, it couldn't catch up to the unicorn. However, Han Shuo was clearly much faster than the Cyclops. Han Shuo immediately ignored the Cyclops and chased after the unicorn as soon as he saw the unicorn turn around and flee. Han Shuo hadn't even used his full strength, but his speed had already surpassed that of the unicorn. When the unicorn had only leaped a few hundred meters, he suddenly blocked its path like lightning. Generally speaking, if one wanted to keep a magical beast as a magical pet, they first had to have the power to make it look at you seriously. Only humans who could display power that could convince it would have the right to communicate with it. Otherwise, it would be useless no matter what they said. Thus, Han Shuo didn't hesitate at all. After blocking the unicorn's path with a speed faster than it, he immediately released 2 necromancy spells, the Boundary of Weakness and the Boundary of Fear. Han Shuo very skillfully enveloped a large area. Much to Han Shuo's surprise, the Boundary of Weakness and the Boundary of Fear affected many magical beasts of all levels in the area. However, the unicorn still ran as if it was flying, leaping dozens of meters with a single leap. It turned around and prepared to flee in another direction. The unicorn's spotlessly white horn shone with a strange luster. A pure and holy power flowed out from its horn, seemingly purifying the Boundary of Weakness and the Boundary of Fear. It was actually not affected by the 2 enchantments at all. Han Shuo was startled, but soon came to his senses. The horn of a unicorn was incomparably bizarre. It had the effect of purifying evil energy. It seemed that the Boundary of Weakness and the Boundary of Fear were also within the range of purification. Seeing that the Boundary of Fear and the Boundary of Weakness were useless, Han Shuo wasn't discouraged. In the blink of an eye, he once again blocked the unicorn's path. This time, Han Shuo didn't use necromancy spells. He directly stuck close to the unicorn, and before it could react, he grabbed at it with lightning speed. The unicorn wasn't afraid of the Cyclops, and it even used magic to ravage the Cyclops. However, when it faced Han Shuo, it didn't have any courage. It was smart enough to sense Han Shuo's power, and it knew that it couldn't compete with Han Shuo, so it turned around and left. When Han Shuo reached out to grab it, its slender and bright eyes rolled around. Its front hooves kicked the ground, and it changed direction again. It looked like it was determined to escape. Hee, you think you can escape? Han Shuo laughed mockingly. Just as the unicorn was about to leave the range of his two hands, his arms suddenly elongated like a sponge, pressing down on the unicorn's waist with lightning speed. When the running unicorn was grabbed by Han Shuo's two hands, it suddenly felt as if it had been shackled by two iron shackles. That kind of strength wasn't something it could resist, and its body was forcibly locked down, unable to move. The wind blades and lightning bolts shot towards Han Shuo with no regard for their lives. At such a close distance, Han Shuo couldn't dodge and had no choice but to deploy a protective barrier. A series of crackling sounds rang out, but Han Shuo didn't move an inch within the protective barrier, completely unaffected by the wind blades and lightning attacks. Once the unicorn understood that its attacks were useless against Han Shuo, it quickly gave up on its futile attacks. It hung its head dejectedly, and two lines of pitiful tears suddenly appeared in its gem-like eyes. It turned its head to look pitifully at Han Shuo. "I beg you, let me go." The unicorn spoke in a clear and melodious female voice. The beautiful voice was incomparably moving, giving rise to a pleasant sense of beauty in the heart. Han Shuo was startled, not expecting the unicorn's voice to be so melodious. However, Han Shuo's mind was firm, and he clearly wouldn't let the unicorn go just because of its melodious voice. He still held the unicorn tightly and said with a smile, "I can let you go, but you must agree to become someone's magic pet." "Absolutely not." "Then just kill me." When the unicorn heard that it would become a magic pet, its melodious voice resolutely refused. "All right then, I'll kill you right now and pull out your horn." "Heh, your horn must be worth a fortune." Han Shuo laughed coldly as he threatened. He used one hand to gesture on the unicorn's horn, as if considering how to make a move. Wait, I can give you treasures, as long as you're willing to let me go." The unicorn was obviously not as unafraid of death as it had just displayed. When it saw Han Shuo's hand gesture on its horn, it hurriedly made another noise. "Treasures? Heh, do you think a person like me would care about your treasures?" Han Shuo laughed involuntarily and slapped a hand on the unicorn's body. Magical yuan floated within its body like a spider's web, forcibly restraining the unicorn with magical yuan. Han Shuo let go and chuckled as he walked in front of the unicorn. He looked up and down the pitiful unicorn and began to entice it. "Actually, it's not bad to be my woman's magic pet. She'll definitely take good care of you. It's better than staying in this desolate forest. In addition, the human world is truly rich and colorful. There are beautiful things that you can't even imagine. A pure and holy existence like you will only be appreciated in the human world. The magical creatures of the dark forest will never know of your beauty. You must know." Looking at the unicorn, Han Shuo's voice was full of enticement as he spoke slowly. His voice was laced with the bewitching siren, using the unicorn's beauty to entice it and repeatedly emphasizing the splendor of the human world. Under the threat of Han Shuo's life on one hand, and the enticement of the human world on the other, the inexperienced unicorn's pitiful eyes gradually turned into curiosity, as if it had already been moved by Han Shuo's suggestion. It blinked at Han Shuo and spoke after a while. "Is the human world really as beautiful as you say?" "Of course. I promise." Han Shuo was resolute and decisive as he continued to bluff like a charlatan. "There are many beautiful things in the human world that you've never seen before. Only when you're in the human world will your beauty be appreciated by others. With my protection, no one will dare have ill intentions towards you. I can even help you evolve once more. As long as you agree to become my woman's magical pet, you'll discover that the human world is your true paradise." The unicorn obviously understood that it had fallen into Han Shuo's hands and had no other choice. On one hand, it was afraid of Han Shuo's death threat, and on the other hand, it was truly a bit curious about the human world. Its bright, gem-like eyes blinked for a while and no longer hesitated, nodding pitifully. Before Han Shua could rejoice, the unicorn suddenly started haggling again. However, I want to choose my own master. It must be a woman, not a dirty man like you. Don't worry, it'll definitely be a beauty. You'll like her. Han Shua guaranteed with a chuckle, thinking that there would still be room for bargaining once you arrived in human society. Human society is naturally colorful, but you'll quickly understand the viciousness of human hearts. All right then, I promise you. Let me go, the unicorn said dejectedly, looking like it had already accepted its fate. I'll first remove a portion of my power from your body, but I'll still leave something in your body to prevent you from taking the opportunity to escape. As Han Shua spoke, he removed a portion of his power and patted the unicorn, saying, I've left an imprint in your body. No matter where you hide, I'll be able to find you, so you'd better know your place. Got it, the unicorn replied in resignation, muttering softly, What a despicable fellow. I hope my master isn't such a despicable and evil fellow. Otherwise, I'd rather die than live with such a despicable and evil fellow. Han Shua listened to the unicorn's mutterings and didn't say anything else. Just at this moment, the sound of heavy footsteps slowly approached, and the shadow of an enormous creature gradually appeared in the distance. The Cyclops slowly approached and walked to Han Shua's side. Seeing the unicorn standing obediently in front of Han Shua, he asked with some surprise, Why has it suddenly become obedient? Of course, so what if it's not obedient? Han Shua said with a smile, then looked the Cyclops up and down, wondering if the Cyclops had any value. Rumble. An earth-shattering sound came from the depths of the dark forest. The direction of the sound was very far from where Han Shua was. Something big must have happened for it to be so loud from so far away. The unicorn and the Cyclops had obviously heard the sound as well. Fear appeared in their eyes, as if they were afraid of the commotion in the depths of the dark forest. Do you know what's in the depths? Han Shua asked with a frown when he saw their fearful expressions. I don't know, but I saw an enormous dragon enter there a few days ago. That dragon was as strong as you are, and should be a powerful level 5 creature. The unicorn replied with some trepidation. It was only level 3, and a level 5 dragon was equivalent to a demigod in the human world. The unicorn was obviously a bit afraid of a level 5 dragon. I don't dare go in either, but there seem to be many powerful creatures entering recently. Something big seems to have happened in there. The Cyclops also replied. Oh? Han Shua started, then said thoughtfully, Then I'll have to go in and take a look. Unicorn, stay here. I'll come back for you. Han Shua ignored the unicorn as soon as he finished speaking and flew straight into the depths of the dark forest. In such an area where gravity had increased, if two people were to fight, the one with the stronger body would have the upper hand. If a magus wanted to use the levitation spell to fly in this area, they would need to expend dozens of times more mental strength than usual. Even a sacred magus might not be able to stay in the air for long periods of time. Such a strange area made Han Shua very curious as to who set it up. Although the gravity here had increased by dozens of times, it wasn't a problem for Han Shua. He used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to slowly soar into the air, moving at a much slower speed towards the Emerald Lake. Although the gravity was strong, Han Shua could still withstand it. He just had to expend a lot more energy than usual. However, just when Han Shua arrived above the Emerald Lake, a gust of wind suddenly came from afar. Before Han Shua could react, an enormous silver dragon suddenly appeared above the Emerald Lake. This enormous silver dragon didn't seem to be affected by the gravity of this place, or perhaps the gravity here was set up by him. He stood proudly in front of Han Shua and coldly sized up Han Shua. The enormous silver dragon sized up Han Shua for a while and suddenly said, "Get back. This isn't a place you should enter." This enormous silver dragon's body was over 20 meters long. His body shone with a hard luster like that of iron and stone. Coupled with his unswerving eyes, He looked rather valiant and powerful. What's inside? Hee, I'm very curious. Han Shuo also sized up the enormous silver dragon. He didn't mind the dragon's cold obstruction and only asked curiously, "This isn't something you should know. Human, leave this place as soon as possible. Otherwise, you will regret it." The enormous silver dragon seemed to be a bit impatient. His enormous body continuously twisted above the Emerald Lake. His cold voice was filled with the arrogance of a high-ranking race. The dragon race had always been very arrogant. They believed that they were the noblest race. Other than that, humans, elves, orcs, and other races were all treated as inferior races. This arrogance had existed since ancient times. Just like how the forest troll liked to be greedy and the dark elves liked to be lascivious, it was deeply ingrained in their subconscious. However, Han Shuo clearly wasn't afraid of him. At this level, Han Shuo's strength far surpassed that of most enormous dragons. Han Shuo chuckled as he looked at the arrogant, enormous silver dragon. His eyes narrowed into slits as he said with some toughness, "What if I insist on going in? Then, I'll throw you out right now." The enormous silver dragon snorted coldly. The arrogance unique to the dragon race spat out from his fist-sized nostrils. His enormous body twisted a bit. In this area where the gravity was tens of times stronger, a hurricane suddenly appeared out of nowhere. In the blink of an eye, it appeared next to Han Shuo. The hurricane's power pulled at Han Shuo and forcefully flung him out. In this area where the gravity was tens of times stronger, normal people would find it difficult to walk. Seeing that Han Shuo could fly above the Emerald Lake, he naturally thought that Han Shuo was a magician using levitation. With his many years of experience guarding this place, the more a magician used levitation to fly, the harder it would be for them to resist the suction of the hurricane. The enormous silver dragon coldly sized up Han Shuo. In his eyes, Han Shuo was like a puppet that could be manipulated by the hurricane. When the hurricane formed, he seemed to have already seen the scene of Han Shuo being flung out of the Emerald Lake and falling back into the spider web magic formation. Hee, do you really think that you can do whatever you want after laying down this gravity barrier? Han Shuo disdainfully looked at the enormous silver dragon. When the hurricane arrived, his entire body shone with a black light, as if his body had turned into a thick cocoon. Whoosh whoosh. The hurricane enveloped Han Shuo, and a huge pulling force suddenly attacked his body. However, contrary to the expectations of the enormous silver dragon, Han Shuo did not fall. He was not affected by the hurricane at all. "Good. You really are not an ordinary human," the enormous silver dragon praised. With a twist of his body, his long tail suddenly swept over. The hurricane was useless. The enormous silver dragon clearly saw Han Shuo as an opponent worthy of his attention. This time, he began to use the tyrannical strength of the dragon race to stop Han Shuo. "Good." Han Shuo laughed. He stood there unmoving like a mountain. Suddenly, he extended his hands and made a strange hand seal. Suddenly, a surging force that could topple mountains and overturn the seas exploded from between Han Shuo's hands. It took the form of a towering stone pillar and fiercely bombarded the enormous silver dragon's tail. The enormous silver dragon's body was also famous for its tyrannical strength. Even a 1,000-year-old tree would be cut in half by the swing of its tail. But Han Shuo only needed to make a hand seal before a huge force rushed out. Before the dragon's tail could reach Han Shuo, the enormous force from Han Shuo's palms had already landed solidly on the enormous silver dragon's tail. The enormous silver dragon felt as if his tail had lashed a towering mountain. Not only was it unable to shake the mountain, but his tail was burning with pain. Once Han Shuo made a move, he would always seize the opportunity to not give his opponent a chance to counterattack. His body, under the high-speed circulation of demonic yuan, suddenly sped up. Before the enormous silver dragon could react from the pain of his tail, he suddenly discovered that the human had unknowingly appeared on his enormous body. Boom! A punch landed directly on the enormous silver dragon's body. They had the power to topple mountains and overturn seas, and had the power to directly confront gods. The legends about the Titans quickly went through Han Shua's mind. In the past, Han Shua hadn't believed in the legends about the Titans. But now, just by looking at their enormous size, he immediately understood that the legends were probably true. A single Titan of this size could probably flatten an entire city. Roar! A furious roar suddenly sounded from Tanai in the canyon. Han Shua stared blankly for a moment and hastily turned to look at the canyon. He saw a primordious dragon over 100 meters long coiling around a mountain peak. This primordious dragon was the largest Han Shua had ever seen. The energy coming from the primordious dragon made Han Shua's heart palpitate. The primordious dragon was a widely circulated legend on Profound Continent. Han Shua knew that since ancient times, there were legends about the primordious dragon guarding Profound Continent. It was said that the primordious dragon silently maintained order on Profound Continent. Whenever something threatened the lives of all the races on Profound Continent, the primordious dragons would come out to maintain order and keep the continent stable. With just one look, Han Shua was certain that this 100-meter-long primordious dragon was the legendary primordious dragon. The mighty aura coming from this primordious dragon was even more powerful than that of the saintess he encountered on the sacred mountain of the Church of Light. Han Shua believed that even the six-horned tribal king of the soul race would not be a match for this primordious dragon. Without a doubt, this primordious dragon possessed the terrifying strength of a true god. While Han Shua was observing his surroundings with a solemn expression, an angry dragon roar suddenly came from the mouth of the silver dragon that Han Shua was chasing. It was obvious that this silver dragon was very angry, and it was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. After the silver dragon's furious roar sounded, the titans and dragons around Tanai in the Great Gorge no longer looked at the battlefield in the sky. Instead, they all stared at Han Shua. Over a dozen titans and over 20 WIRMS would be enough to make a country rise in power in any country. There were so many powerful creatures that had existed since ancient times, and all of them were staring at him. An invisible pressure suddenly pressed down on him, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. Compared to the 6 demigods in the sky, the titans and dragons of Tanai of the Great Gorge did not have demigod strength. But even so, the deterrence of over 40 colossal beings suddenly glaring at him was still very frightening. Human, what are you trying to do by trespassing? The giant silver dragon roared again when he saw that Han Shua didn't respond. He seemed to be a little impatient. 2 of the titans near Han Shua were sizing up Han Shua with vigilance as they slowly approached Han Shua. It seemed that if Han Shua said anything unfavorable to them, they would immediately strike and smash Han Shua into a meat patty. Why are you here? Suddenly, a cry of surprise sounded from a distant golden dragon. This golden dragon that was originally extremely far away from Han Shua quickly flew over and looked at Han Shua in astonishment. You're Cedric? Han Shua stared blankly at this golden dragon. He felt that this was the golden dragon Cedric that he had seen a few times in the past, so he asked tentatively, It's me, Cedric. Don't you remember? Sure enough, it was Cedric, and he cried out in surprise. There were over 20 dragons in Tanai of the Great Gorge. Not a single one of them had transformed into human form. Their enormous bodies were entrenched there, and half of them were golden dragons. Cedric hadn't transformed into his human form, so he didn't look special at all when he landed in the middle. It was only natural that Han Shua didn't recognize him. When he heard that it was Cedric, Han Shua took another look at the Great Gorge and suddenly realized that this was the legendary Dragon Valley. Seeing that he had met someone familiar, Han Shua let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, So it's Cedric. Hehe, long time no see. I came here purely for an adventure. I heard the rumbling in the sky and rushed over out of curiosity. I didn't expect to see such a spectacle. What's going on? Cedric, do you know this human? The giant silver dragon, who had suffered a small loss at Han Shua's hands, looked at Cedric, who had rushed over excitedly, and asked in puzzlement. Yes, I've also told you that a human knight robbed me of my treasures and even injured me. It's all thanks to him. He was the one who helped me, and last time, in the Forbidden Land, he was the one who destroyed the boundary that never dissipated. We're friends, and nothing will happen to us, Cedric explained to the Silver Dragon. When he said this, the two Titans and the Silver Dragon no longer looked at Han Shuo with hostility. However, the Silver Dragon that had suffered at Han Shuo's hands still snorted coldly and said, "The battle has reached a critical juncture. No matter who it is, we cannot let him enter the space-time discontinuum." "I understand," Cedric replied. Then, he turned to Han Shuo and said, "We are fighting for the safety of Profound Continent. Some evil beings from other planes of existence are attempting to enter our world through this special space-time discontinuum. Our race of dragons and titans are doing everything in our power to fend off these evil beings from other planes of existence." Having watched for so long, Han Shuo could roughly understand what was going on without Cedric's explanation. As self-proclaimed guardians of the continent, the Titans and the Primordius Dragons were obviously fighting with all their might for the safety of the continent. Han Shuo didn't even need to look closely to feel the danger of the battle. All those Titans and Dragons had grave expressions on their faces. Most of them even had solemn expressions in their eyes. This was a clear indication of the cruelty of the battle. At such a critical juncture, any external factor would be enough to change the course of the battle. It was only natural that they would seal off the surroundings to prevent those with unknown identities from entering. Not good. Valor can't hold on much longer. A green dragon suddenly cried out in alarm. Following the gazes of the crowd, Han Shuo discovered that among the 7 gates in the sky, the only golden dragon that didn't possess demigod strength was on the verge of collapse amidst a sea of lightning bolts. Blood was spurting out of his body. He was on the verge of death. The dragons of Tanai in the Great Gorge all had mournful looks in their eyes. They silently sighed for the dying dragon warrior. "Next, get ready." An aged sigh came from the mouth of the Primordius Dragon coiled on top of the mountain peak. His voice was so desolate and helpless, as though he couldn't bear the sorrow of parting. "I'll go." The Silver Dragon that Han Shuo had chased all the way here suddenly let out a high-pitched roar. He had the vigor of one who was ready to die. "You're not strong enough. You dragons have sacrificed one. It's our turn to fill the gap." Before the Silver Dragon could move, a 30-meter-tall Titan in the middle of the gorge shouted with a thunderous voice. This Titan was currently the tallest among the Titans in the middle of the gorge. He seemed to be the most powerful one as well. He had already started moving the moment his thunderous voice rang out. He stomped his giant leg, and his body shot out like a bolt of lightning as the ground trembled like an earthquake. The golden dragon's body suddenly shattered into pieces, turning into a rain of blood that rained down on the unknown space-time turbulence. The moment the golden dragon disappeared, the Titan's body coincidentally arrived at the gate. At this moment, something strange happened. No one knew if the gate suddenly enlarged, or if the Titan's body suddenly shrunk. The Titan, who shouldn't have been able to merge into the gate, seemed to have been stretched and twisted, merging into the gate in an extremely abstract manner. As soon as the Titan's body entered the gate that had been constantly expanding miraculously returned to normal. From what Han Shuo could see, the Titan seemed to be fighting with some sort of invisible creature after entering the world of light. He was punching and kicking with his hands and feet. Han Shuo focused his attention and observed carefully, but he couldn't figure out what was going on inside. All he could see was the bizarre scene of light flying everywhere. His consciousness couldn't detect any trace of the existence of any strange creatures either. This was very unusual and illogical. However, from what Cedric had said, Han Shuo knew that the place seemed to be some space-time discontinuum. There were always many unimaginable and bizarre things happening in the region of space-time discontinuum. Han Shuo gradually came to a realization. Although the Titan could enter Han Shuo's eyes, he was in the space-time discontinuum, perhaps a great distance away from the Profound Continent. The range of Han Shuo's consciousness was limited. It was only natural that he couldn't sense the Titan with his consciousness. The third one. I wonder how many more we have to fill in. Sigh. An elderly green dragon sighed. Han Shua's brows were deeply knitted as he looked at the Titan, who had charged into the gate without hesitation. He knew that the Titan would be throwing his life away in vain. This Titan wasn't much weaker than the golden dragon who had just died. That golden dragon didn't last long before being torn apart. It was likely that this Titan would suffer the same fate. Despite knowing that it was a dead end, the Titan still rushed in without a care for his own safety. Han Shua couldn't help but feel some respect for them. For the safety of the millions upon millions of lives on Profound Continent, these titans and dragons that had existed since ancient times had always been guarding this place, silently making great sacrifices without regard for their own lives. This kind of spirit indeed made Han Shua feel deep veneration for them. Although the race of giant dragons were arrogant by nature and had always considered themselves to be a superior race, it could be seen from this incident that these dragons did have some redeeming qualities. Without their silent protection, who knew what Profound Continent would be like by now? Cedric, what's going on? Han Shua's spontaneous respect and curiosity about what was behind that gate gave Han Shua a few more ideas. This space-time discontinuum has existed in the depths of the dark forest since ancient times. We don't know how it came into being, but it constantly changes with time and space, often forming interplanar passages that connect to our Profound Continent. We, the race of giant dragons and the race of titans, have always guarded this place to prevent the arrival of evil beings from other planes of existence. Ever since I was born, over the long 2,000 years, we have experienced over 100 changes in the space-time discontinuum. Most of the interplanar passages that formed were located in the vast and harmless starry sky. Only a dozen or so of them connected to other material planes. However, those connections didn't cause too many disputes. There were 3 times when they were attacked by experts from other planes of existence, but they were all easily intercepted by us. Coincidentally, this time, the space-time discontinuum actually formed in the abyss where the demons were entrenched. When those powerful demons sensed the formation of this interplanar passage, they immediately snuck their way over. At first, there were only some weak demons that tried to barge in, but they were quickly disposed of by us. It was precisely because of this that we thought it would be the same as the previous few times, and didn't really take this time's threat to heart. Who knew that from the day before yesterday, there would be continuous attacks from high-level demons? Yesterday, even more powerful demons joined the fray. Only then did we realize the severity of the situation. We immediately sent word to experts from all over the continent, hoping that they could work together to resist the invasion of the demons. However, due to our previous negligence, the message was delivered a little too late. Only 2 demigod existences of the orc race, who happened to be cultivating in the depths of the dark forest, joined in the resistance against the demons. It's just that this time, a total of 7 interplanar passages were formed, and those demons were extremely powerful. Only demigod existences could barely resist them. We only have 6 demigod existences on our side, so we have to take turns defending the last door. So far, 3 of us have already died. The Primordius Dragon has to use his divine energy to alter the formation of the space-time discontinuum, and simply doesn't have the energy to take care of that door. Furthermore, due to the special formation of each interplanar passage, we can only send 1 creature to defend it. If this goes on, who knows how many people we will have to sacrifice to quell the invasion of the demons this time. Let's not even talk about quelling it. It's already a problem whether or not we can withstand it. Look, even the 6 demigod existences are showing signs of fatigue. If the Primordius Dragon can't change the direction of the space-time discontinuum or seal it in a short period of time, I'm afraid that this time, Profound Continent will have to face a destructive attack from the demons of the abyss. The giant silver dragon that had previously exchanged blows with Han Shua shook his enormous head and appeared very pessimistic. Rumble. A thunderous rumble came from the dimensional passageway that had just entered the Titan Giant's dimension. Inside the interplanar passage, multicolored rays of light shot out like the most gorgeous fireworks. There was a soul-stirring beauty to it. However, the Titan that had just charged into the interplanar passage seemed to have been caught unprepared. For some unknown reason, numerous wounds had opened up on its tough body and fresh blood dripped down like a fine rain. This is bad. That interplanar passage has also been joined by high-level demons. Damn it, could it be that profound continent really can't avoid this calamity? The primordious dragon suddenly let out a sorrowful sigh. His draconic breath sped up and blazing lights interweaved. His divine energy enveloped the space-time discontinuum. It seemed that he was ready to go all out. What do we do? What do we do? Cedric was incomparably anxious. Like a headless fly, his enormous head swayed back and forth. Suddenly, Cedric cried out in surprise. His fist-sized dragon eyes fell on Han Shua. He cried out in pleasant surprise, "Great primordious dragon. He is also a demigod expert." Upon hearing those words, all the titans and dragons in Tanai of the Great Gorge turned their attention to Han Shua. It seems that I can still be the savior of the profound continent for a while, Han Shua thought to himself. He was about to seek the primordious dragon's opinion when he suddenly heard another rumble. When he turned his head to look, he saw that the titan who had just entered had a body full of gashes and gashes. Blood was splattering all over the unknown space-time tunnel in trickles. Han Shua was full of curiosity about the scene inside. With the thought of retreating as soon as possible if he couldn't withstand the attack, he transformed into a leaping bolt of lightning and passed through the door in an instant, landing in that strange, unknown space. As soon as Han Shua entered, he was shocked by what he saw. Chapter 5:13. At a glance, all he saw were strange creatures that he had never seen before. These creatures filled the entire gray space, each bearing their fangs and brandishing their claws as they ferociously pounced over. These abyssal demons varied in size. The tall ones were more than 10 meters tall, and the short ones were only the size of a palm. They were of all colors, and each one was ferocious and terrifying. Their mouths were filled with fangs, and there was a foul stench flowing out of them. Some abyssal demons not only had a foul stench coming out of their mouths, but their bodies also flowed with thick pus. They were just like the aliens in the sci-fi movies that Han Shua had seen before. They were ugly, ferocious, and disgusting, causing people to instinctively loathe them, wishing they could wipe them all out. In front of Han Shua was an abyssal demon that was more than 10 meters tall. It looked like a giant sarcoma, and its ugly body was not only overflowing with pus, but it was also swelling as if there were small abyssal demons inside its body that were about to break free at any time. It only had one huge green eye that was filled with a cruel and bloodthirsty desire. These small abyssal demons were the size of beetles, but they emitted corrosive smoke. They swarmed toward Han Shua by the hundreds. They squeaked, and their small and sharp teeth were grinding like saws. They were like a group of poisonous locusts, and just looking at them made one's scalp tingle. This was a strange space that Han Shua couldn't imagine. It was gray and empty, and he was at a crossroads that the abyssal demons had to pass through. Meteors constantly streaked past him, bringing with them a beautiful evil light. But when he looked around, he couldn't see his specific location. Right in front of Han Shua was a dense horde of abyssal demons. He could sense the door-shaped interplanar passageway behind him, as well as the abyssal demons that were everywhere. Apart from that, there was only a hazy, dusky scene, and dazzling beams of light flashing past. Squeak, 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 squeak. The abyssals let out strange cries that Han Shua didn't understand. As soon as they saw Han Shua appear, they swarmed over like bees. Many abyssals that could spray venom immediately shot out a fine rain of venom. This venom was multicolored like a painter's paint, trying to paint an abstract and cruel picture of decay on Han Shua's body. Although Han Shua was extremely confident in his body's regenerative ability and strength, he wasn't willing to try this disgusting venom. Not only did the viscous venom reek, but it also had corrosive, numbing, and other toxins. At this moment, Han Shua finally understood why the golden dragon and titan's bodies had been torn to shreds and their blood had flowed like a river. In the face of so many abyssal demons, the golden dragon and titan's massive bodies couldn't dodge at all. In such a strange space, the Golden Dragon and the Titan's massive bodies not only couldn't gain the upper hand against thousands of abyssal demons of all sizes, but instead became their fatal weakness. It was precisely because their massive bodies couldn't withstand too much damage that they were defeated so quickly and died in the mouths of the locust-like abyssal demons. Only demigods could use special methods to form a defensive boundary or magic shield around their bodies. Only then could they resist the corrosive venom of the abyssal demons. Although the Golden Dragon and the Titan's bodies were extremely tough, no matter how tough they were, they would still be corroded and torn to shreds under the spray of a few hundred venoms. Even though Han Shua's body was stronger than the Golden Dragon and the Titan's, he didn't dare to use his body to withstand the corrosive venom. He hurriedly deployed a protective barrier, and a hazy black barrier instantly enveloped Han Shua within. The few hundred venoms that sprayed down were all blocked by the protective barrier that was as thin as a cicada's wings. Faint wisps of smoke emerged from Han Shua's protective barrier, making Han Shua look hazy and otherworldly. It was a stark contrast to the ugly and disgusting abyssal demons around him. What a powerful venom! Han Shua couldn't help but exclaim as he looked at the colorful wisps of smoke rising from his protective barrier due to the spray of venom. At Han Shua's level of magical cultivation, he would be impervious to fire and water, and invulnerable to blades and spears once he deployed his protective barrier with the support of his powerful magical yuan. In principle, as long as Han Shua had an unending supply of magical yuan to support his protective barrier, it would be able to help him block all physical and magical attacks. Of course, if the enemy's attack power exceeded the limits of the protective barrier, it would still shatter. However, the venom obviously didn't have any great power. Logically speaking, a protective barrier formed purely from magical yuan through a special secret method should have a perfect defense against this kind of venom. However, the appearance of the wisps of multicolored smoke indicated that the strange corrosive power of the venom was also effective against this special form of protective shield. Han Shua could clearly feel that when the venom came into contact with his protective shield, the rate at which his magical yuan was being drained was noticeably faster as the faint smoke rose from the shield. Squeak, 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 squeak. The abyssal demons seemed to be somewhat astonished as well. After a concentrated spurt of venom, they suddenly collectively stopped and began to communicate with Han Shua using a method that he couldn't understand. After finishing off the Golden Dragon and the Titan, they cruelly and greedily prepared to break through the interplanar passageway in front of them. However, they suddenly discovered another hateful obstacle. When they saw that this obstacle was small in size, they thought that they could eliminate it in an instant. They didn't expect that their venom, which had always been successful in every endeavor, would actually be blocked. The abyssal demons that had stopped, under the command of the abyssal demon in front of Han Shua that was covered in pus like a giant sarcoma, they once again crazily swarmed towards Han Shua. This time, not only did they continue to spray venom, they even bared their eerie fangs without hesitation. It was obvious that they were prepared to use this primitive method to bite through Han Shua's protective barrier. A bunch of crazy and barbaric creatures. If they were allowed to come to Profound Continent, perhaps all the races on Profound Continent would become their food. Han Shua inwardly came to a conclusion as he looked at the abyssal demons that were crazily swarming towards him. The skeletal staff suddenly fell into Han Shua's hand. Looking at the crazily clamoring abyssal demons charging towards him with glistening eyes, Han Shua quickly chanted an incantation. First, rows of bone spears pierced through the air. Then, the signature boundary of fear and boundary of weakness of necromancers suddenly enveloped the entire space. As long as there were living beings in the material world, they would never be able to escape the fate of death. Even the cruel and ferocious abyssal demons were no exception. As long as there was death, there would be the element of death in the material world. Therefore, necromancy magic, an attack method that evolved from the element of death, could still display the power it should have. It had to be said that the skeletal staff was truly a miraculous weapon. Using the skeletal staff to release necromancy magic, the power of an ordinary necromancy magic spell could be doubled. It was also thanks to the skeletal staff that the boundaries of fear and weakness could envelop all the abyssal demons. Under the effects of the boundaries of fear and weakness, all the abyssal demons were affected. Not only did their frenzied swarming towards Han Shuo suddenly slow down, their hearts were also filled with fear of Han Shuo. Traces of timidity appeared in their cruel and bloodthirsty eyes. The densely packed bone spears whizzed through the air, piercing through the bodies of some of the weaker abyssal demons. Green, red, grayish-white, and brown blood spurted out from their bodies. Some of the larger abyssal demons were even covered in bone spears, emitting blood-curdling screeches that made one's scalp numb. Rows of bone spears shot out horizontally like a fine rain, forcibly intercepting hundreds and thousands of abyssal demons. Taking advantage of this gap, Han Shuo once again chanted a necromancy incantation, preparing to summon a large army of undead creatures to help him out. However, when the necromancy incantation fell, not a single one of the undead creatures that should have landed in front of Han Shuo appeared. Han Shuo was stunned. At first, he thought that he had made a mistake in chanting the incantation in a hurry, so he chanted again, the skeletal staff also swaying accurately. Still, not a single undead creature appeared. This time, Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat. He immediately used the connection he had with the little skull to try and contact the little skull. Surprisingly, he actually couldn't feel any traces of the little skull's existence and was unable to determine the location of the necromancy world. Could it be that necromancy creatures couldn't be summoned in this place? With this question in mind, Han Shuo couldn't help but carefully size up his surroundings. What entered Han Shuo's eyes were streaks of dazzling meteors streaking across the sky, and a vast, dusky scene. What he was stepping on wasn't solid ground, but white mist. On Profound Continent, this white mist definitely wouldn't be able to bear any weight. However, when Han Shuo stepped on the white mist, he was able to feel it to the touch. In front of Han Shuo, a dense horde of abyssal demons blocked his line of sight. Behind him, there was an interplanar passageway leading to the Profound Continent. Apart from that, there was only an empty, dusky scene around him, as though he was situated in a vast and boundless universe. It seemed that this area was also affected by the space-time discontinuum. Time and space were in complete disarray, making it impossible to form precise planar coordinates. Therefore, he couldn't use necromancy magic to communicate with the netherworld, and naturally couldn't summon creatures from the netherworld to this unknown space where time and space were in chaos. After sizing up his surroundings, Han Shuo immediately came to this conclusion. Looking ahead, the thousands upon thousands of abyssal demons, although somewhat timid and sluggish under the effects of the boundary of fear and weakness, after adapting for a while, they actually advanced at a much slower pace than before, unswervingly charging towards Han Shuo. Han Shuo wasn't discouraged. Even if necromancy magic couldn't be used, he still had the true barrier of demonic arts. Unlike necromancy magic, which required the element of death, all the energy of Han Shuo's demonic arts was contained within his body. No matter which plane Han Shuo went to, no matter if that plane had the aura of death or not, the demonic arts that existed within his body would never be affected in the slightest. It was also at this moment that Han Shuo rejoiced at how correct his initial decision had been. He'd always firmly treated magical yuan as the foundation of his life preservation training. Otherwise, he would have suffered greatly in this place, unable to summon enormous numbers of undead creatures. If he only relied on necromancy magic as a single method of attack, he would have suffered greatly this time. Come on, you disgusting and filthy abyssal creatures. Not caring if these abyssal demons could understand him, Han Shuo smiled wickedly and slowly took out the blood seether from his space ring. With a wave of his hand, the blood seether flew out gracefully. As soon as the blood seether appeared, a thick mist of blood was released from it. An evil and strange power was slowly released from the blood mist of the blood seether. Wherever the blood seether passed, the bodies of all the abyssal demons that were enveloped by the blood mist suddenly swelled up, and their originally sluggish speed became even slower. The Bloodseether was a demonic weapon of slaughter that Han Shuo had spent a great deal of effort to refine. As long as a creature had blood in their bodies, they would be within the range of the Bloodseether's attack. Although these abyssal demons had blood of different colors compared to ordinary creatures, they were still within the range of the Bloodseether's attack. Wherever the Bloodseether passed, the flow and speed of the blood in the abyssal demons' bodies would suddenly change drastically. At a glance, the blood actually looked like long earthworms wriggling on their bodies, making their already sinister and disgusting appearances look even more ugly. The Bloodthirst banner changed the flow and speed of their blood. As they spun at high speeds, their bones emitted popping sounds. When the blood in their bodies spun at an astonishing speed, some of the abyssal demons couldn't withstand it anymore and their bodies exploded. After the first abyssal demon exploded, more and more abyssal demons couldn't bear the effects of the Bloodseether's power. Their bodies swelled up and finally burst open, spraying multicolored blood everywhere. All the abyssal demons that were enveloped by the blood mist gradually exploded due to the high-speed rotation of their blood. Seeing the outstanding achievements of the Bloodseether, Han Shuo couldn't help but consider whether he should refine more of this special demonic weapon. It had to be said that the destructive power of this special demonic weapon was very satisfying to Han Shuo. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.